Chapter 291. Bretel City was located in the easternmost part of the Lancelot Empire. It was next to 7 duchies that were constantly at war. None of the 7 duchies were as strong as the Lancelot Empire and were constantly at war all year round. However, once the Lancelot Empire attempted to invade the 7 duchies, the originally warring duchies would immediately unite and resist the Lancelot Empire's invasion. Individually, the 7 duchies couldn't contend against the Lancelot Empire. However, once the 7 duchies united, their strength would surpass the Lancelot Empire. Fortunately, the 7 duchies couldn't unite. Otherwise, if the Lancelot Empire really faced an attack from the 7 duchies, it would truly be somewhat difficult. Bretel City was one of the cities of the Lancelot Empire that was locked in a stalemate with the 7 duchies. Bretel City occupied an extremely large area. Unfortunately, because it was located in such a remote area, it was also affected by the war between the 7 duchies. There were all kinds of people mixed in the city. Brian, under normal circumstances, it's impossible for a count like you to possess such a large territory. Bretel City's area is about the same size as Valence City. Normally, only those with the title of Marquis have the qualifications to enjoy such a city. Bretel City is indeed a bit chaotic, but it's just right for a spirited young man like you to manage. Once you manage Bretel City well, it will be of great benefit to your future prospects. If you want to obtain the title of Marquis or Duke, it will depend on whether you can grasp the opportunity. Candide, one of the 3 heavyweights, looked at Han Shuo and explained in a deep voice in a secret room. Han Shuo, who was sitting opposite Candide and flipping through the information on Bretel City, nodded when he heard Candide's words. He put down the information in his hands and raised his head, saying, Bretel City is barren. The land can't be used to grow any crops, and only produces some special iron and silver ores. The 7 duchies are at war with each other all year round. Bandits and thieves run amok there. Even some duchies' regular armies can disguise themselves as bandits and loot the towns around Bretel City. Such a chaotic place with such a valiant people is indeed an interesting place. So, what do you think? The current Han Shuo was already a count. After killing Leah Kane in the garden house, Han Shuo's strength had been fully proven. Even Candide no longer treated Han Shuo with the attitude of a superior talking to a subordinate. It was as if he was treating Han Shuo as an equal. I don't have any plans for now. Wait until I get to Bretel City and see the situation. Han Shuo replied indifferently. That's good. Keep these documents well. They will prove your status as a Lord of Bretel City. The former Lord of Bretel City has been deposed due to his incompetence. The City Lord's mansion of Bretel City is now yours. You can take over everything with these documents. Also, Bretel City has Bretel and Bretel City Army. Perhaps you aren't good at leading troops into battle, but I think Lawrence will communicate with you in this regard. You only need to protect Bretel City from being invaded by those duchies and bandits and maintain order within the city. Candide said, All right, then I'll leave first. If there's anything, I'll contact you through the magic mirror at the Dark Mantle Stronghold in Bretel City. Han Shuo nodded and said this to Candide before leaving the Dark Mantle headquarters. In a mansion in the north of the city, Han Shuo strode in. A butler was already waiting in front of the door. Upon seeing Han Shuo walk in, he immediately said respectfully, Honorable Count, you have finally returned. My name is Kalas, and I am the butler of your mansion. Hello, Kalas. Can you tell me more about the matters regarding the mansion? Han Shuo asked with a faint smile. Kalas was a white-haired old man. His clothes were not extravagant, but they were clean and tidy. His manner of speaking was refined and courteous. He should have been in this line of work for many years. After hearing Han Shuo's words, Kalas immediately said respectfully, Honorable Count, this mansion has belonged to you since you defeated Leah Kane. Everything is operating normally inside. In the past few days, a total of 35 Asen City nobles have come to visit you. We have received a total of 73 gifts, all of which have been properly stored away. As Kalas spoke in a soft voice, Han Shuo noted down all sorts of information regarding the mansion. From Kalas, Han Shuo learned that many nobles' territories weren't in Asen City. However, They would have a mansion in Asen City that was usually used to stay when meeting with His Majesty the King. Of course, there were also some nobles whose territories weren't flourishing enough. They didn't like to live in their own territories, so there were many nobles who lived directly in Asen City. In short, it was fine as long as they returned to their territories regularly to handle some matters and ensure that there wouldn't be any major disturbances within their territories. This mansion had been bestowed upon him by His Majesty the King. There were all sorts of maids, servants, and stewards within. Han Shuo had the right to dismiss them, and had to pay them a certain amount of salary every month in order for them to maintain the normal operations of the mansion. Kalas had described some miscellaneous matters in great detail. "All right, Mr. Kalas, I understand all of this. All right, bring me to the drawing room and invite Lawrence and Miss Phoebe over. I want to see the two of them. If anyone else asks, just tell them I'm not here." Through the Een Demon's observation, Han Shuo had already discovered that there were many people who came to make friends with him in this mansion. These people were arranged in different rooms, so they couldn't know each other's movements. The Een Demon that had been injured during the battle with Leah Kane had already recovered after being nourished by the blood essence in the Cemetery of Death. Although he had used up a few drops of blood essence, the Een Demon was no longer in danger. "Yes, Lord Count," Kalas responded and brought Han Shuo into a spacious drawing room before respectfully withdrawing. This drawing room was as big as a basketball court. 7 bright lights hung from the ceiling, and the floor was covered with a soft carpet. There were many comfortable chairs placed around it, making it look very spacious and bright. After a while, Lawrence and Phoebe came over together. Lawrence laughed heartily and said to Han Shu as soon as he entered, "Brian, congratulations. I heard that His Majesty the King was conferring a title on you today, so I found Phoebe and came over together. I thought that you would come back." After winning a large sum of gold coins, Phoebe appeared to be glowing. Her charming face was filled with a bright luster as she looked at Han Shuo with a fiery gaze and said, "Brian, Cameron is finished this time. The merchant alliance he formed suffered a huge loss because of him. His allies no longer trust him. The crisis facing our Buzzed Empire has been resolved." Seeing the two so happy, Han Shuo smiled and nodded, saying, "I plan to go to Brettel City. It's full of chaos and very interesting. If Brettel City can develop well in my hands, it will also be beneficial for you, Lawrence. I already knew that you would be in charge of Brettel City. Brettel City is indeed very chaotic. The personalities of the commoners are much tougher than those of Asen City. The armies and bandits of the Grand Duchies would occasionally loot some of the surrounding villages. For so many years, the city lord of Brettel City has been powerless. This caused the merchants of Brettel City to leave the city one by one. The nobles and commoners have lost confidence in Brettel City. I reckon that it won't be easy for you to quickly take control of the situation once you arrive in Brettel City," Lawrence said with a frown when he heard Han Shuo mention Brettel City's matters. The Lancelot Empire had sent out armies many times in an attempt to invade the 7 Grand Duchies through Brettel City. However, they returned in defeat time and time again, causing the Lancelot Empire to finally give up on this idea. After the armies had retreated, the remaining tens of thousands of Brettel City's city guards couldn't contend against any of the duchies. It had become a habit for those duchies to take the opportunity to loot Brettel City. However, although the 7 Grand Duchies had the strength to occupy Brettel City, they didn't do so due to their mutual misgivings and fear of provoking the Lancelot Empire. They only looted Brettel City from time to time, but never truly occupied the city. Therefore, the city lord of Brettel City was very sullen. Brettel City itself wasn't as strong as any of the Grand Duchies. Brettel City's land was barren, but it wasn't small. However, there wasn't much profit to be reaped from it. His Majesty the Empire also wasn't willing to spend a huge amount of manpower and resources to garrison Brettel City to resist the 7 Grand Duchies. In this way, Brettel City had become a tasteless existence, but a pity to abandon. It would be a pity to abandon it, but there wouldn't be any profit to be made if they didn't abandon it. Therefore, it was very awkward. Don't worry, I know what kind of place Brettel City is. I have my own plans. In any case, His Majesty has given me full authority to manage Brettel City. I will take good care of Brettel City. Han Shuo chuckled evilly as he answered in a mysterious and unfathomable manner. What do you plan to do? Lawrence asked after a blank stare. You will know when the time comes. I will make Brettel City even more chaotic. Han Shuo said with an evil smile. Chapter 292. Senior Brother Lawrence, I have some things I want to discuss with Brian alone. Phoebe glanced at Lawrence and said softly. Lawrence stared blankly for a moment before coming to his senses. He chuckled and said, All right, don't worry, Brian. Before you head to Brettel City, I will arrange for some generals who are good at fighting to go first. Nodding his head, Han Shuo smiled and said, Then many thanks. I really don't know much about some battle strategies. With the help of your people, I think they will definitely be of great help to me. All right, you guys chat. I'll be heading back first. After a while, I will personally go to Brettel City to visit you. Lawrence winked at Han Shuo and Phoebe, then walked out of the living room with a smile. After Lawrence left, Han Shuo immediately took a step forward and pulled Phoebe into his arms. After a series of lingering kisses, Han Shuo directly carried Phoebe and fiercely rushed into the bedroom. He forcefully flung Phoebe onto the spacious and soft bed. Then Han Shuo pressed down on top of her. As their clothes flew off, the two naked bodies were entangled together. Phoebe's low moans were seductive as she desperately catered to Han Shuo's thrusts. They were entangled until there wasn't a trace of strength left in them. After the violent storm subsided, Phoebe lazily leaned on Han Shuo's wide chest. Her delicate fingers gently slid down Han Shuo's body as she murmured in satisfaction, I can't leave with you for the time being. Cameron's merchant union is facing the crisis of disintegration because of the huge losses from this bet. Our Bust Merchant Guild has made a huge profit this time. It's a good opportunity to clean up the mess and make it difficult for Cameron to escape this time. You should first deal with the matters of your merchant guild. Brettel's place is very chaotic. Wait for me to stabilize the situation first. Han Shuo softly said as he gently caressed Phoebe's tender shoulders. Oh, right, there are some missing materials from last time. I've collected all of them for you during this period of time, so I'll give you these first. Phoebe suddenly remembered the list that Han Shuo had given her last time. There were still a few rare materials missing. She exclaimed softly. As soon as he said this, Han Shuo was pleasantly surprised and said, That's great. The place of extreme water was in the Valley of Sunshine. Now that all the materials had been gathered, Han Shuo could first plant the water elite zombie in the place of extreme water. After a while, he could directly harvest the earth elite zombie. Phoebe lazily rubbed her space ring and materials slowly appeared one by one. Han Shuo conveniently put them into his space ring. When all of this was done, Phoebe took out a crystal card and handed it to Han Shuo with a smile. I made a huge profit from this time's bet. There are 300,000 gold coins in this crystal card. You've just arrived in Brettel City, so you'll definitely need money. Take it first. Hee. So these 300,000 gold coins belong to you. I've also bet all the gold coins you've handed over to me before. You've made a huge profit, haven't you? The Bust Merchant Guild had taken out 700,000 gold coins to bet on Han Shuo and Lia Kane. According to the odds of 1 to 5, the Bust Merchant Guild had won 3,500,000 gold coins from this bet. 355,000 gold coins was definitely a huge sum. Most large families would only have this much wealth accumulated over hundreds of years. Even the Bust Merchant Guild itself was only worth around 1,500,000 gold coins before this bet. But because of this grand bet, the Bust Merchant Guild's wealth had doubled. This also meant that the Bust Merchant Guild had officially become a major financial magnate in the Lancelot Empire. 300,000 gold coins wasn't even a tenth of the bet's total, but it was a huge fortune for Han Shuo. Looking at Phoebe's charming face that was asking for a reward, Han Shuo was ecstatic as he slapped Phoebe's perky, but said with a laugh, Not bad. The gold coins in your hands are indeed in the right hands. Of course, Phoebe said proudly. 300,000 gold coins in Han Shuo's hands was like a meat pie falling from the sky. In his joy, Han Shuo ignored Phoebe's pleas and directly hugged Phoebe, pounding into her until Phoebe didn't even have the strength to speak. The next day, The slowly awakened Phoebe left Han Shua's mansion through the back door under Han Shua's escort. After Phoebe left, Han Shua returned to his bedroom and opened a cupboard. He used a key to fiddle around in the dark crevice, and a passageway automatically split open under the cupboard. Every noble's mansion usually had a secret room to store things, or do some secret things that couldn't be known by others. This mansion bestowed by His Majesty was no exception. When Candide had met with Han Shua at the Dark Mantle headquarters, he'd already told Han Shua all the secrets of this mansion, including this underground secret room. Walking down the passageway, Han Shua saw a large, empty room. Apart from a few empty cupboards, there was nothing else inside. Placing the magic wand in one of the cupboards, Han Shua directly passed through the transportation matrix and arrived at the Cemetery of Death. The Cemetery of Death was gloomy all year round. Apart from the white bones that littered the ground, there were no signs of life or change. After leaving the Cemetery of Death, Han Shua let out a light breath and gazed into the depths of the dark forest, concentrating his senses. Why hasn't the Fire Elite zombie finished so late this time? Han Shua frowned and muttered to himself in confusion. The Earth Elite zombie and Wood Elite zombie definitely hadn't been unearthed for as long as the Fire Elite zombie. If it wasn't for the fact that Han Shua could sense the Fire Elite zombie's prolonged aura, Han Shua really would have thought that something had happened to him. Could it be because of the fire attribute treasure, the Fire Lotus, or because the Lord of the Flames is there? Han Shua pondered for a moment and guessed inwardly. Unlike the Earth Elite zombie and Wood Elite zombie, the place of extreme fire had nurtured the fire attribute treasure, the Fire Lotus. Chu Kanglin's memories didn't describe what would happen if that happened. In addition, there was a terrifying Lord of the Flames there. What was even more peculiar was that the Lord of the Flames seemed to have treated the Fire Elite zombie as his child. With so many strange things added together, the Fire Elite zombie must have been affected. Otherwise, the Fire Elite zombie wouldn't have taken so long to emerge. Forget it. I'll plant the Water Elite zombie for now. Han Shua didn't think too much about it. Since he could still sense the Fire Elite zombie's aura, he knew that there shouldn't be any problems. Therefore, he decided to first go to the Valley of Sunshine and plant the Water Elite zombie in the place of extreme water. It didn't take long for Han Shua to fly from the dark forest to the Valley of Sunshine's sphere of influence. Han Shua first arrived at the Soul Destroyer mercenary group and landed on that strange cliff. Strangely, Han Shua didn't sense the aura of Dark Dragon Gilbert. He only saw Grant when he entered the cliff. When Grant saw Han Shua arrive, he immediately bowed respectfully and explained, "Leader and Gilbert took on a mission and aren't here for the time being." "What's the situation like now?" Han Shua and the three Een demons circled around and discovered that the number of mercenaries here had increased by 200. These 200 people were all unfamiliar faces. Therefore, he understood that the Soul Destroyer mercenary band was in the process of expanding. What else could it be? The major powers have gone from fighting in the dark to fighting openly. They've been fighting fiercely during this period of time. Loriton's Cairo mercenary band is the most powerful. The other three parties have no choice but to band together and fight against the Cairo mercenary band. A few bandit powers occasionally participate. In any case, the Valley of Sunshine is in a mess now. Grant smiled as he explained to Han Shua. "Oh, right. After the previous incident, did the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and the House of Minlo come looking for trouble with you?" Han Shua recalled that he had killed Ferguson and heavily injured Adam Minlo. He couldn't help but ask in astonishment. "Heh, those two parties indeed hate our Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Unfortunately, they don't know where we are." Chapter 293. With the experience of refining the earth, wood, and fire elite zombies, Han Shua didn't spend too much effort on the Water Elite zombie. When Han Shua had finished and leapt out of the well, Han Shua suddenly sensed two unfamiliar presences. The Shura Soul formation was still operating in the courtyard of the shop, and it was filled with a deathly aura. The Calamity Church's Dark Grand Magus Edwin and the female alchemist Belinda were pacing back and forth outside the formation, not daring to enter. They looked at the gloomy courtyard from the surrounding rooftops. The aura of death within the Shura Soul formation was thick, and the two of them couldn't clearly see what Han Shuo was doing inside. Han Shuo could clearly see the two experts of the Calamity Church when he walked out of the well and raised his head. Edwin and Belinda obviously knew that great danger lay below. Therefore, although they looked at the changes below with astonishment, they didn't dare take the risk of entering the formation. They appeared to be quite cautious. Han Shuo knew that Edwin and Belinda had already understood the dangers of this place when the experts of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band had ambushed this place last time. It was only natural that they didn't dare approach this time. Han Shuo walked to the eye of the formation and sent a beam of dark light into it. The originally howling wind and deathly aura of death dissipated in an instant, and the formation returned to its normal state. Han Shuo sat down on the chair in the middle and looked lazily at Edwin on the rooftop. He said faintly, "Mr. Edwin, it seems that you're always this sneaky every time you come. Is this how your Calamity Church does things?" Although the strange changes in the courtyard had disappeared, Edwin and Belinda didn't dare walk down. They chuckled and said, "Sorry, let's chat up here for a while. Congratulations on killing Ferguson, but you've also angered the Church of Light. They'll pay any price to deal with you this time. Hehe, our Calamity Church sincerely invites you to join us. As long as you're willing to join us, we'll pay any price." "Sorry, I'm not interested." Han Shuo had rejected them last time, and now Han Shuo was still rejecting them without any room for discussion. "All right then. Since you're not willing to join our Calamity Church, can we discuss our cooperation? Hehe, the Church of Light has already dispatched a small group of Temple Knights. Their goal should be to deal with you. Although there aren't many Temple Knights, they are all true experts. This is the Church of Light's sharp sword for eradicating heresy. They are on their way to Bretel City and are waiting for you. Even if you didn't come to the Valley of Sunshine this time, our people would have notified you when you arrived at Bretel City. I didn't think I'd be able to meet you here, so I'll tell you in advance. Let's see if there's any possibility of us cooperating." Edwin was very sincere, telling Han Shuo such an important piece of news first. Han Shuo couldn't help but frown when he heard Edwin's words. The headquarters of the Church of God of Light was located in the most powerful Odin Empire on the profound continent. There was also the Angela Empire between the Odin Empire and the Lancelot Empire. The Temple Knights had always protected the Church of God of Light. For them to dispatch a small group of Temple Knights just for Han Shuo, it seemed that the Church of Light had truly made up its mind. "I won't be cooperating with you for the time being, but I might contact you if I need anything." Han Shuo thought for a moment and said to Edwin. Edwin immediately chuckled when he heard Han Shuo's words. "Our Calamity Church and the Church of Light are mortal enemies on the profound continent. The enemies of the Church of Light are our friends. All right then, our Calamity Church might appear by your side when you run into trouble. We'll meet again then." Edwin and Belinda didn't linger after saying this. They looked at each other and cautiously left Han Shuo's roof, quickly disappearing from sight. Han Shuo immediately moved after Edwin and Belinda left. He released all three of his demons and had them follow behind Edwin and Belinda. He wanted to see why the two were staying in the Valley of Sunshine. Edwin and Belinda were extremely careful and made many turns along the way, on guard against enemies following them. However, their figures still couldn't hide under the surveillance of the three demons. In the end, Edwin and Belinda actually entered the headquarters of the Cairo mercenary band together. Because they were tailing them in secret this time, Han Shuo didn't openly enter the Cairo mercenary band. Instead, he hid in a place not far from Tanai and used the three demons to spy on Edwin's movements. Han Shuo had actually guessed that Edwin had hooked up with Loritin when Edwin and Belinda had snuck up on him. Otherwise, Edwin and Belinda wouldn't have been able to find him so quickly after Han Shuo had returned to the Valley of Sunshine for only a few hours. The Valley of Sunshine was the Cairo mercenary band's sphere of influence, and the Calamity Church's eyes weren't that wide. "Mr. Edwin, you want to see Brian?" Loritin immediately asked when Edwin arrived. Nodding, Edwin thanked him with a smile. "Thank you for informing me. I just saw Brian." "Oh right. How are the preparations coming along?" "The 300 Death Guards of the Calamity Church will arrive in the Valley of Sunshine in the next 2 days. Anyone can get the Mithril Mine, but we can't let the Church of Light take it. Otherwise, if they make Mithril armor out of it and equip the Templars, it'll bring us great trouble in the future. Loritin's expression was cold as he said in a sinister voice, "Don't worry, as soon as your death guards arrive, I'll immediately mobilize the Cairo mercenary band and flatten the powers around the Mithril mine. Humph, I almost died there last time. I won't be so careless this time. The three great powers will pay with blood this time." Heh, that's for the best. If the Church of Light wants the Mithril mine, then we'll make them pay with their lives. Edwin had a sinister smile on his face as he discussed the details of the operation with Loritin. Han Shua listened for a while and memorized all the contents of their conversation. When Edwin and Belinda were about to leave, Han Shua took the lead and silently left the Cairo mercenary band. After leaving the Cairo mercenary band, Han Shua immediately left the Valley of Sunshine and returned to the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. He once again inquired about Trunks and the others' movements. From Grant, Han Shua learned that Trunks and Gilbert would need some time before they could return. Han Shua didn't stay in the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. He immediately flew back to the Cemetery of Death and returned to the secret room in his mansion. Not long after he walked out of the secret room, Steward Kalas respectfully said to Han Shua, "My Lord Count, there's a young lady called Fanny who wishes to see you. She says that as long as you mention her name, you'll definitely see her." Han Shua blanked and suddenly remembered his promise to Fanny. When he'd left last time, Han Shua had said that he'd look for her within a few days. Who knew that he'd become so busy that he'd forgotten about this? Now, Fanny had actually come looking for him. "She's there. Take me to her." Now that Han Shua had his own mansion, if Fanny and Phoebe frequently came looking for him, the relationship between Han Shua and them would be exposed sooner or later. Just thinking about this gave Han Shua a headache. Seeing him so anxious, Steward Kalas was somewhat astonished. He immediately said respectfully, "My Lord Count, please come with me." After a while, Kalas brought Han Shua to the room where Fanny was. He pointed inside and said, "Miss Fanny is inside. You can leave first. Don't let anyone come in," Han Shua instructed. After Kalas left, Han Shua braced himself and walked in. With a glance, he saw Fanny sitting in the center. This time, Fanny wasn't wearing a magic robe. Instead, she'd changed into a navy blue dress. When she saw Han Shua walk in, she immediately snorted coldly and looked at Han Shua with cold eyes. "My Lord Count, you finally have the time to come see us commoners? I'm sorry. Because of some matters, I was a bit late. It won't be like this in the future. Fanny, you must forgive me." Han Shua smiled wryly. Apologizing as soon as he'd walked in meant that he was in the wrong. It was only natural that Fanny would be so angry. "This isn't the first time. It seems that you've never fulfilled your promises." Fanny's face was still expressionless as she looked coldly at Han Shua. Smiling wryly at Fanny, Han Shua raised his hand and said, "I was wrong. You can punish me however you want." "All right then. I'll forgive you as long as you promise me that you'll be an honorary teacher of the necromancy major." Fanny thought for a moment and glared fiercely at Han Shua before speaking. Being an honorary teacher of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force was only a title in name and didn't need to be bound by the rules of the academy. They might only occasionally give a few lectures and answer questions when invited by the academy. The various majors of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force competed with each other. Being able to find a few famed experts within the empire to be an honorary teacher was a measure of the strength of each major. "No problem," Han Shua readily agreed. "You bastard. How could you kill that evil person Leah Kane? How did you become an archmage necromancer? Just how many other things have you lied to me about?" Fanny was delighted when she saw Han Shua agree, but then a series of questions erupted. Chapter 294. Han Shua had managed to make Fanny, who had come to denounce him, beam with joy in just half an hour. Under his gentle words, a faint smile appeared at the corner of Fanny's mouth as she left Han Shua's mansion in satisfaction. Arriving at the Buzzed Merchant Guild at the fastest speed to find Phoebe, Han Shua went straight to the point and requested, "I want explosives, the kind with the most destructive explosive power, enough to flatten a small mountain." "Heavens, what do you want?" As a normal woman, Phoebe didn't need to move her toes to know what Han Shua wanted. Her pretty face was filled with shock when she heard that Han Shua needed explosives so urgently, and the more explosive the better. Don't ask so much, get it for me as soon as possible, don't let anyone know. Since Han Shua had made up his mind, he wouldn't hesitate. Time waited for no man. Naturally, the sooner the better. Once a woman had a physical relationship with a man, even a cold and arrogant character like Phoebe would change for this man. Especially when Phoebe knew that Han Shua was smart and wouldn't do something stupid that would result in his death. Therefore, although she had some doubts, she didn't insist on asking more when Han Shua urged her again. She immediately nodded. Give me some time. I'll try to gather it through other channels. All right. I'll come back the day after tomorrow at the latest to get the explosives. Don't leave for the next 2 days. Han Shua instructed and hurriedly left the buzzed merchant guild. Han Shua silently returned to the secret room in his mansion and used the transportation matrix to return to the cemetery of death. He used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to fly to the mountain valley where the mithril mine was located and summoned the Earth Elite Zombie to descend upon this plane. The 3 demons slowly floated out and flew into the valley. Faces after faces leapt into Han Shua's mind. The Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, the House of Minlo, and the Catter Orc Alliance had more than 1,000 people stationed near the valley. They had surrounded the entire valley. The mithril mine was still in operation. However, due to the steep and narrow terrain of the mine, mining the mithril was not an easy task, especially since the mithril ore was mixed in with the silver ore and often existed in the deepest part of the mine. Therefore, although the 3 forces worked overtime these days, the progress of the project was still not satisfactory. The 3 demons circled around every corner of the valley. The Earth Elite Zombie hid in the ground, shuttling back and forth like 2 Xingsuan. According to Han Shua's mental control, he left many holes in the depths of the valley that couldn't be seen, just in case Phoebe hid her explosives. From Loriton and Edwin's conversation, Han Shua knew that there would be a bloody battle in the valley. Most of the forces of the 4 great powers in the Valley of Sunshine would be involved in this battle, including Loriton's Cairo mercenary band, as well as the 10 or so small powers that Loriton had tied together with various benefits. Due to the existence of the mithril mine, the other 3 powers had invested a large amount of troops here. Once the battle broke out, this valley would become the largest battlefield in the history of the Valley of Sunshine. What Han Shua needed to do was throw in enough explosives to destroy all the powers in the Valley of Sunshine in one fell swoop. This matter had to be done very carefully. Only the Earth Elite Zombie's miraculous ability to drill into the ground would be able to complete this mission without anyone noticing. At this time, Han Shua had released the 3 demons. He hadn't discovered that Tanai had an Earth Mage, so he was even more daring to have the Earth Elite Zombies set up the traps. Even with the Earth Elite Zombies' miraculous ability, it still took a while to set up the tunnels in Tanai. During this time, Han Shua kept an eye on the experts stationed in Tanai through the demons. He was deeply afraid that these people would sense the abnormalities in the ground and discover this time's setup. It was a good thing that everything went smoothly. When the Earth Elite Zombie finished setting up the tunnels, Han Shua immediately left the valley. He'd been studying the Archmage level Soul Tremor spell in the Cemetery of Death, and he'd felt that this spell was incomparably cryptic and difficult to understand. Soul Tremor used one's own mental strength to directly attack the opponent's soul. In order to master this spell, one must first have a certain amount of research on the soul. In addition, one also needed to grasp the technique of mental strength attacks. Even Han Shua found it difficult to gather one mental strength into an attack. As he paced around the Cemetery of Death, Han Shua furrowed his brow as he thought about the method of mental strength attacks. When Han Shua concentrated his mental strength, he could clearly feel the formless mental strength. However, to turn it into a tangible attack, no matter how hard Han Shua tried, he couldn't do it. It's indeed a bit difficult, Han Shua muttered to himself. He couldn't help but concentrate his mental strength, trying to form it into a tangible attack. The consciousness is formless and formless, but has boundless uses. Its attacks are based on the heart, and the heart will move. Han Shua suddenly remembered a paragraph of a demonic mantra. This was a description of the consciousness in demonic magic. When demonic magic reached the next separate demonic realm, demonic practitioners would be able to clearly sense the consciousness. The consciousness was actually a process of strengthening the soul. When a demonic practitioner reached the separate demonic realm, their soul would transform into the consciousness. As long as the consciousness wasn't destroyed, the demonic practitioner would be able to obtain eternal life. The consciousness was a formless and formless existence. Once the soul transformed into the consciousness, it would have many wondrous uses. The simplest use was to use the consciousness to sense the changes in the surroundings. The clarity and range of the senses would vary according to the strength of the consciousness. When fighting with others, as long as the consciousness was strong enough, it could directly form all kinds of strange attacks on the enemy, such as illusions or physical attacks. It could also control the opponent's mind, turning them into a puppet and other wondrous uses. The consciousness could also be used to attack the enemy's soul, but it was much more profound than mental strength. The demonic magic had a detailed explanation of the attack methods of the consciousness. Han Shuo recalled these memories and seemed to have grasped something. He felt that the consciousness and mental strength had the same wondrous uses. The difference was that the consciousness was the transformation of the demonic practitioner's soul. Like the demonic infant, it was the most important foundation of the demonic practitioner. The consciousness was even more important than the demonic infant. The demonic infant was the source of the demonic practitioner's power. It provided the practitioner with an endless supply of demonic yuan. Once the demonic infant was destroyed, the practitioner would lose all of his power. There wouldn't be any demonic yuan left in his body, and he would become an ordinary person. The consciousness was the demonic practitioner's soul. Once the demonic infant was destroyed, as long as the consciousness wasn't destroyed, the practitioner could use past experience to rebuild the demonic infant. However, once the consciousness was destroyed, the practitioner's soul would truly scatter, never leaving a trace in the world. On the other hand, mental strength was the same as the demonic infant. Even if one lost all of their mental strength, they would at most be unable to gather magical elements to cast spells. It would only turn a magus into an ordinary person and wouldn't take their life. In the cemetery of death, Han Shuo continued to ponder, especially when it came to the detailed theory of attacks on the consciousness. Han Shuo carefully and slowly comprehended it. Gradually, he seemed to have grasped something. When he gathered all of his mental strength and calmed his mind, a thought suddenly leapt into his mind. His mental strength suddenly became very active, and a wondrous fluctuation was suddenly produced. At this moment, Han Shuo quickly chanted a magical incantation. A strange energy was produced out of nowhere and quickly merged with his mental strength. A wave-like impact suddenly appeared, drifting forward like ripples in the water. Oh, there's some progress. What's missing? Han Shuo let out a light breath. He had just felt his mental strength condense and form some kind of tangible attack in front of him. However, since there was no soul in front of him, Han Shuo's attack couldn't find a target. Therefore, he wasn't sure if this attack would be effective or not. It looks like I'll need to find a living person to test it out on, Han Shuo murmured to himself. He thought for a moment and discovered that it was getting late. So he immediately left the cemetery of death. Again, without waiting for a report, Han Shuo directly went to the Buzzed Merchant Guild and found Phoebe in her room. He asked, "How is it?" "I've gathered some, but due to the lack of time and the fact that the gunpowder is a dangerous item banned by the country, the amount isn't enough to blow up a small mountain. If you give me a bit more time, I can go to a city further away and gather more." Phoebe looked helplessly at Han Shuo and said a bit apologetically, "There's not enough time. Just gather as much as you can. It's best not to let anyone know about this. Otherwise, there might be some trouble." Han Shuo said with a frown, "Don't worry. I'm doing this through a few small merchant guilds. Moreover, I'm secretly buying them in batches. I don't think there will be any problems," Phoebe replied. Afterwards, Phoebe's space ring continuously flashed as bundles of wrapped explosives passed through Phoebe's hand and fell into Han Shuo's space ring. Only when Phoebe had handed all the explosives to Han Shuo did she ask, "Brian, what are you planning to do? You're not thinking of destroying Brettel City, are you?" It has nothing to do with Brett L. City. I haven't returned there yet. Han Shuo casually replied, hugging Phoebe and kissing her. He said with a smile, "All right, don't worry about me. I know what I'm doing." Under Phoebe's astonished gaze, Han Shuo hurriedly left the buzzed merchant guild and directly used the transportation matrix in the Cemetery of Death to return. He quickly flew towards the mountain valley where the mithril mine was. Chapter 295. The night was like water, watering Tanai Mountain. Spring had arrived, and the fragrance of flowers and grass was still intoxicating even at night. Danger lurked in the quiet night, accompanied by the low cries of insects. There were teams of mercenaries stationed in every corner of the mithril mine. The calm was filled with caution and vigilance. A team of black armored figures were like shadows in the dark night, slowly moving through the lush shrubbery with a sinister and mysterious aura. Dark Grand Magus Edwin floated in the air, leading the way. 300 death guards were like specters, silently following behind Edwin. With Loriton in the lead, the 2,000 Cairo mercenaries followed behind the 300 death guards, slowly advancing towards the mithril mine. Behind the Cairo mercenary band was a group of 10 or so small factions. There were about 1,000 experts wearing mercenary uniforms of various colors. In the valley where the mithril mine was located, the three factions had gathered to guard this place. However, because the three factions still needed to guard their lair, they only had a total of more than 1,000 mercenaries guarding the mithril mine in the valley. These 1,000 or so mercenaries were 3 times less than Loriton's 2,000 elite mercenaries, 300 death guards from the Calamity Church, and 1,000 experts from the 10 small factions. Dark Grand Magus Edwin released a dark magic spell, and a black mass of air slowly spread out. The area in front of the valley that was lit up by the moonlight was suddenly enveloped in a faint layer of mist, as if the moisture of the night was slowly gathering together. For some unknown reason, the insects that had been chirping in a low voice gradually lost all signs of life. Arthur, the wind archmage of the House of Menlo, was currently resting with his eyes closed. He seemed to have sensed the abnormal movements and couldn't help but open his eyes to look outside the valley. He muttered to himself, "What's going on? Why aren't there any sounds of insects around?" In a tent to Arthur's left, the orc warrior Callery called out in a low, muffled voice, "Hey Arthur, it's getting late. Rest early. I feel like something's wrong. I'll go take a look." Arthur mumbled to himself as he walked out of his tent. He used levitation to float into the air and looked out of the valley. Why is it foggy? Arthur muttered to himself as he slowly floated out of the valley. There were all sorts of tents in the valley, and there were also a few high-spirited mercenaries in charge of night patrols. When they saw Arthur float into the air, the mercenaries in charge of night sentries all greeted him. Some of the Rainbow Sickle mercenaries laughed softly and said, "This fellow isn't sleeping in the middle of the night. Does he want to go out and have fun in the middle of the night? Heh, that's true. It's been hard on us to be assigned to such a place. Who cares? We just need to guard our night." Another mercenary casually replied. "Sure." Edwin, who was approaching, suddenly let out a soft sigh and made a gesture towards the death guards behind him. The death guards that had been advancing like ghostly shadows suddenly crouched down and retreated, concealing themselves in the lush shrubbery without any signs of life. Loriton's eyes were very sharp, and he immediately waved his hand behind him when he saw Edwin's movements. The long, snaking line was instantly replaced by soft panting sounds. These people were extremely far away from Arthur in the valley, and such soft panting sounds wouldn't be heard at all. Arthur walked out of the valley and gazed into the distance with furrowed brows. He didn't discover anything out of the ordinary, so he stopped for a while and mumbled something before returning to Tanai. At this moment, the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, the House of Menlo, and the Catter Orc tribe had all gathered according to the distance between them. An orc who was guarding the outskirts of the Catter Orc tribe was suddenly jolted awake by an ear-piercing whistle. By the time he reacted, he discovered that there was a dangling crossbow bolt nailed to a large tree nearby. There was a letter tied to the end of the bolt. Next was the Adam Menlo family. A guard of the Adam Menlo family was also awakened by a crossbow bolt. There was also a letter on the crossbow bolt. Next was the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, which was right next to the Mithril Mine Valley. They were also shaken by the crossbow bolts that carried a letter. The leaders of the three great powers in the Valley of Sunshine were all roused from their various states in the blink of an eye. They hurriedly gathered their men with the letter in their hands and woke up all the sleeping mercenaries. They rushed towards the Mithril Mine Valley at top speed. After delivering the 3 letters of warning with super-fast flying spells, Han Shua once again silently returned to the surroundings of the Mithril Mine Valley and hid himself. All the explosives had been set up in advance, and Han Shua coldly watched the changes in Tanai through the 3 demons, waiting for a fierce battle to break out. The 3 powers in the Mithril Mine had more than 1,000 mercenaries in total. Once this force was destroyed by Loritan, it would be difficult for the 3 powers to turn the situation around even if they joined hands. Last time, the 3 powers had gathered at Tanai Mountain, and Loritan's enmity towards Loritan had made it so that he wouldn't be merciful towards them. Once the experts guarding the Mithril Mine were killed, what awaited them would be even more brutal revenge. Florida and the other 2 were able to distinguish themselves in a place like the Valley of Sunshine, so none of them were stupid. They naturally understood this logic. Holding the attitude that they'd rather believe it, the 3 sent out their experts to communicate with each other. They brought out most of their experts from their lairs and rushed towards the Mithril Mine at top speed. As time passed by in the valley where the Mithril Mine was, some of the mercenaries who'd originally been in high spirits began to show signs of fatigue. They yawned continuously, their mental state at its worst. Edwin, who'd been hiding outside the valley, had already met up with Loritan at this time. He'd been staring coldly at the valley with a dark face when he suddenly turned his head and glanced at Loritan, saying, "We can make our move now." Killing intent burst forth from Loritan's eyes, and even his shiny bald head seemed to sparkle with a cold light. He nodded and said lowly, "My brothers died in this valley last time. This time, I'll make them pay 10-fold, 100-fold. Chief Hagen, are you all ready?" "Don't worry, Chief Loritan. We've long since prepared half of Tanai's Mithril Mine." The 10 small powers knew that they weren't as strong as any of the 4 great powers, so they'd all banded together. Hagen of the Flame Mercenary Band was the leader of this alliance. "Very good. Not just the Mithril Mine. As long as you help me annihilate the other 3 powers, you'll take all of their territory. Our Cairo Mercenary Band will still occupy the Valley of Sunshine. I hope you won't disappoint me." Loritan smiled coldly in his heart, but spoke heartily on the surface. "Don't worry, we know what to do." Hagen laughed slyly, indicating that he completely understood Loritan's thoughts. "All right, enough with the nonsense. Be careful. I'll use a dense fog to cover the path to the valley. Don't make any noise when you enter. It's best if those people all die in their sleep." Edwin yelled impatiently, an unconcealable arrogance in his expression. The Calamity Church was famous throughout the profound continent for being difficult to provoke. Apart from the Church of Light, there were very few powers that could contend against them. Even Loritan wasn't in Edwin's eyes, much less the captains of these small mercenary bands. Therefore, Edwin didn't treat them as sincerely and courteously as he had treated Han Shua. These small mercenary bands understood Edwin's identity and naturally didn't dare provoke him. Just the sinister and mysterious aura of the 300 Death Guards was enough to make their hearts palpitate. These people had long since heard of the Calamity Church's ruthless and callous disregard for human life. When they saw Edwin's impatient expression, they all softly cried out in agreement. Edwin was still a bit proud of these people's fear. He enjoyed this feeling of superiority in terms of strength very much. He hummed lightly in arrogance and waved his hand, ordering a tall and thin death guard in front of him. "Advance, kill them all." The Death Guards were a group of fanatical believers of an evil god. They were fanatical believers who had given all their faith and spirit to the evil god. These people carried the evil god's will and terrifying power, mercilessly massacring all enemies of the Calamity Church throughout the profound continent. They were a group of inhumane executioners who obtained a certain kind of power by offering sacrifices to the evil god, easily possessing the ability to dictate the life and death of others. Under Edwin's command, the Death Guard's gray eyes were filled with fanatical excitement. He was as crazy as Loritan, who had gone berserk 3 times. He gnashed his teeth so hard that it made cracking sounds, as if he was chewing on the bones of some beast or human. His movements were incomparably agile as he led the 300 Death Guards under the cover of the dense fog and rushed towards the valley. The experts of the 3 major powers led by Florida, Adaminlo, and Catter were currently on their way to the valley. Each of them was burning with anxiety as they continuously gave orders, urging the experts below to move faster, afraid that they wouldn't arrive in time. Chapter 296. Tanai's forces were either snoring lightly, dozing off, or dead asleep. There were very few who were awake, and 1 or 2 who were more cautious also slowly closed their heavy eyes under the cover of the medicinal mist. Everything seemed so perfect. It was as if the outcome had been decided from the moment the Death Guards had entered the valley. This ambush would have been a classic if it hadn't been ruined by a terrifying explosion. Rumble. Just as the Death Guard passed through the valley's passageway, a fierce gust of wind blew from an unknown corner of the valley. The wind was extremely fierce, first snapping a small tree on the mountainside. A strange butterfly effect was produced, one after another, and in the end, it unimaginably caused the mountain rocks to collapse. The millstone-sized rocks smashed into the valley along the green moss-covered rock walls. The sound of this kind of movement was so loud that even the mercenaries who were sleeping in the mist of potions suddenly woke up as if they were facing a great enemy. The first thing they did was to grab their weapons before looking at the situation that was happening. Edwin, who was also an apothecary but had extraordinary attainments, was well aware that only slightly less effective knockout agents wouldn't be easily detected by experts. Edwin had been feeling smug that victory was in his grasp when the explosion completely shattered his plans. He looked at the mercenaries stationed in the valley, all of them looking around with weapons in hand, and then looked at the Death Guards that had entered the valley. Edwin could only resist the urge to curse out loud and give the order to attack, charge in, kill. Whether it was Edwin or Loritan, they both understood that there was no longer a chance of a perfect ambush due to this change when they heard the sound of boulders rolling down. The 2 of them cursed inwardly as they gave the order to charge in, but their eyes darted back and forth in the area where the strong wind had come from. Their hearts were filled with a strange sense of doubt. Where did that strong wind come from? Why was it so strong? Why did it have such a miraculous effect? Was it man-made? If so, who could have done it? A series of questions filled their minds in an instant, but it was only for a moment before the 2 of them stopped thinking about it and focused all their attention on the valley where the massacre was taking place. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Within the valley, over 1,000 mercenaries had been startled awake by the falling rocks. An extremely small portion of the mercenaries near the edge of the valley were constantly dodging the falling rocks. The mercenaries on night patrol duty at the very front had already spotted the Death Guards and immediately shouted out loud. All the mercenaries of the 3 factions immediately understood. They pulled out their weapons and started chanting spells. The archers knocked their arrows and aimed at the entrance of the valley. The 300 Death Guards of the Calamity Church spread out like ghosts of the night. They streaked across the moonlight like extremely faint shadows. Their bodies carried a sinister, evil aura, and their eyes were filled with excitement and fanaticism. They held peculiar weapons that looked like spikes in their hands as they flew close to the ground and quickly into the center of the valley. The earth trembled as rows of sharp spikes rose from the ground. Surging flames rapidly converged to form a wide wall of fire to intercept the Death Guards. Lightning zigzagged above the valley and struck downwards. The water men and water dragons slowly took form and dashed away from the wall of fire. The shrill whistles of arrows rang out incessantly, whooshing towards the Death Guards. Tanai Mountain's magi and archers formed a layer of obstruction, instantly blocking the Death Guards that were rushing over. They wanted to kill all of these audacious invaders. However, as the evil guardians of the Calamity Church, the Death Guard's infamy had resounded throughout the profound continent for many years. Naturally, they weren't that easy to deal with. Not only did the 300 Death Guards not slow down, they actually increased their speed. They were wearing a kind of black and gray robes that actually had an extremely strong resistance to magic. Many of the flames that came charging at them were extinguished with a wave of their sleeves. Even the violent lightning bolts that smashed down only caused their figures to pause for a moment. They were far from being able to cause any destructive damage. The armor of the Death Guards is one of our Calamity Church's secrets. How could ordinary magic attacks have any effect on them? Dark Grand Magus Edwin, who had lagged behind, said disdainfully as he looked ahead with a dark face. They could have silently wiped out most of the forces in the valley, but the unexpected occurrence had disrupted their plans. Edwin was naturally displeased. Next to Edwin, the chief of the Cairo mercenary band, Loriton, gripped the divine weapon of the Berserker tribe, the Berserker's battle axe. He laughed sinisterly. This is good as well. It's just a waste of time. It's more interesting for them to struggle to their deaths. This time, the Cairo mercenary band had mobilized all of their elites. In addition to the Calamity Church's 300 Death Guards and the alliance of a dozen or so small powers behind them, they could indeed openly destroy Tanai Mountain's forces. Loriton was a battle-hungry person to begin with. This kind of face-to-face, painful slaughter suited his temperament. Therefore, when he saw Tanai Mountain's mercenaries awaken and turn their sneak attack into a frontal assault, he became even more excited. The corner of Edwin's mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything. He looked at the mercenaries surging into the valley like a tide, inwardly planning how to extort Edwin afterwards. After all, it had taken quite a bit of effort to mobilize the 300 Death Guards this time. Although their goal was the Church of Light, hadn't they also helped Loriton? He had to pay a price. The Death Guards lived up to their name as the God of Death. They charged into the valley with an unstoppable momentum under the surging magic attacks. The 300 Death Guards immediately split into phantom-like afterimages, leaving bloody holes in the mercenaries' bodies with their sharp, thorn-like weapons. These Death Guards trained in a strange kind of fighting aura. They seemed to be able to borrow the power of the evil god in battle. There was a natural evil aura on their bodies, and they could actually use their eyes to make people's souls tremble. The strange fighting aura had a strong corrosive power, often able to destroy the opponent's defenses and directly injure the physical body. Sitting cross-legged on a cliff in the valley, Han Shuo was driving the fierce battle as the Hand of Darkness. He was silently circulating his magical yuan, slowly absorbing the lingering power of Tanai Mountain's dead body into his body while paying close attention to the battle below. The miraculous performance of the Death Guards surprised Han Shuo. Han Shuo could even sense a bit of the evil god's aura from these Death Guards. Last time in Valen City, the necromancer Clarendon, who died tragically at the hands of Han Shuo, had used the altar to summon the three-eyed evil god Ansidezi. Also, the aura of the 1,000-meter-tall evil god with green eyes had appeared in Han Shuo's mind in the lower layer of the Cemetery of Death. Han Shuo could sense a bit of it from these Death Guards. Due to their fanatical faith in the evil god, the Death Guards could obtain some of the evil god's strange divine power. Perhaps they could only borrow a billionth of the evil god's power, but this power still couldn't be underestimated in this plane of existence. This could be seen from the miserable deaths of the mercenaries. 300 Death Guards wasn't a lot, but the damage they could cause was incomparably terrifying. The Temple Knights of the Church of Light and the Death Guards were equal in strength. Judging from the strength displayed by these 300 Death Guards, Han Shuo could imagine that the Temple Knight's strength must be equally terrifying. Hehe, this is getting more and more interesting. Han Shuo laughed coldly as he muttered to himself. He suddenly called out softly, "What will come, or else it'll be boring." Dark Grand Magus Edwin's brow furrowed as soon as Han Shuo finished speaking. He abruptly used the levitation spell to fly into the air and surveyed the surroundings after exiting the valley. He then quickly descended towards Loriton, who had already charged into the valley and was in the middle of a second berserk battle. He quickly called out, "Large amounts of mercenaries are converging in this direction. What's going on? The Rainbow Sickle mercenary band isn't far from here. They should have discovered us with such a large commotion." Hehe, 4 to 500 of Tanai's 1,000 mercenaries have already died. As long as we hurry and finish them off, Florida will be courting death even if he comes. Just his rainbow sickle mercenary band alone won't be able to stop our footsteps. Loriton waved his berserker's battle axe, directly cleaving apart an orc warrior around 3 meters tall. He responded casually and once again charged into the crowd. It looked like he was fighting to his heart's content. No, it's not just the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. There's also a large group of orcs. Edwin was burning with anxiety as he yelled at Loriton. Damn it! What's going on? Loriton was startled and suddenly jumped in front of Edwin, asking in shock, Kill them! Adam Minlo was riding a 10-meter-long flamingo in the air above the valley. Behind him were his clansmen riding all sorts of flying magical creatures. Outside the valley, the muffled sounds of iron hooves pounding on the ground like the beating of drums. The experts of the 3 powers were converging towards Tanai. Loriton and the others' path out of the valley had already been blocked. Fight. Otherwise, no one will be able to leave. Loriton naturally understood the current situation and immediately howled towards the sky. His ferocious nature exploded as he charged towards the remaining mercenaries in the valley. However, after waiting for a while, Loriton only saw Adam Minlo's back turn, his shoulders trembling slightly. It looked like Adam Minlo's heart was twitching, but he had made the right decision. No. This middle-aged man screamed miserably as he was torn apart by Loriton's battle axe. His scream before his death caused Adam Minlo, who was on the flamingo in the distance, to almost lose his footing. The dull sound of iron hooves could finally be heard clearly. With Florida and Catter in the lead, a large number of mercenaries suddenly charged into the center of the valley. Adam Minlo, who was enduring the pain of being cut by blades, was the first to charge into the center of the valley with bloodshot eyes. Fighting aura shot out from the long spear in his hand, clashing with the flames spewed out from the flamingo and taking a few lives in an instant. An even more desperate battle was taking place in Tanai. As a spectator, Han Shuo silently absorbed the murderous aura and coldly watched Tanai's hellish battle to the death, desperately suppressing his strong desire to participate. Time flew by quickly. The already evenly matched battle caused the eyes of several parties to turn bloodshot. This time, 90% of the powers in the Valley of Sunshine had participated. Whether it was for the Mithril Mine, for the power of the Valley of Sunshine, or for the hatred that had accumulated over the years, they all erupted in the valley. The unyielding life energy of the strong was absorbed to their heart's content. Very soon, the ground of Tanai was littered with corpses. The corpses piled up and caused the battle to begin. For the sake of profit and hatred, the various races used slaughter to their heart's content to play out this battle. Gradually, as Han Shuo absorbed the enormous amount of energy, a blood-red mist floated around him. The entire sky above the valley was suddenly shrouded in a blood-red mist. That terrifying murderous aura, along with the nauseating smell of blood, enveloped the entire valley. Unfortunately, the various powers in the valley, whose eyes were bloodshot, didn't notice this abnormal change. They still focused all of their attention on the enemy in front of them, using the weapons in their hands, their fists, and even their teeth to attack the enemy. Everyone seemed to have gone completely mad. Han Shuo, who was about to lose control of himself, forcefully suppressed his bloodthirsty desires and finally gave an order to the Earth Elite zombie hiding underground. Han Shuo understood that this wasn't the best time because the parties were still fighting. It wasn't time for one side to win yet. In principle, he could still wait a while longer. Unfortunately, Han Shuo understood that his current condition was extremely bad. Absorbing too much murderous aura at once was beyond what Han Shuo could bear. He was deeply afraid that he would lose his reason and not have a chance. 90% of the powers in the Valley of Sunshine had been reduced to a quarter of their original number. This was definitely the most intense battle in the history of the Valley of Sunshine. The major powers that had been fighting to the death suddenly felt the earth tremble violently. However, before they could react, every corner of the valley seemed to be exploding, and the thick smell of gunpowder instantly spread. At this time, there were people fighting in every corner of the valley. Every explosion caused great damage. The mercenaries who were fighting were suddenly engulfed by the underground explosions, their bodies immediately disintegrating into bloody chunks. For a moment, the valley cracked and the mountains collapsed. The sounds of explosions rose and fell incessantly. More than half of the surviving experts in the Valley of Sunshine died in this violent explosion. Due to the underground explosion in the valley, the huge rocks above also cracked. Rocks that were bigger than humans fell like raindrops. The huge rocks fell from a height of several hundred meters. That kind of violent impact was incomparably terrifying. All the experts who were careless and got smashed directly into meat paste. The various powers that had been fighting in Tanai were all dumbfounded by this sudden explosion. Now that 90% of the Valley of Sunshine's forces had joined in, this kind of earth-shattering bombardment didn't differentiate between friend and foe. The damage caused was even more exaggerated. Even if Loriton and the others were slow, they could still sense the scent of a conspiracy. The huge rocks continued to fall from above, and the entire valley was about to be sealed off. All the Tanai experts who had been awakened by the explosion suddenly reacted. All of them looked up to the sky and cursed as they fled in a sorry state. Loriton and the others' voices were even louder as they shouted for everyone to quickly retreat. If it wasn't for the explosion covering up the blood mist, perhaps these people would have discovered Han Shua's existence. After all, the fiendish Han Shua had left an unforgettable impression on them with his blood mist attack in this very valley. However, the rolling rocks had shattered the blood mist and could no longer form a distinct blood mist. Add to that the fact that the falling rocks were too terrifying. No one paid attention to the sky. All of them only cared about escaping and didn't expose Han Shua's existence. The leaders of the major powers sensed that there was a conspiracy, and the resentment in their hearts was as endless as the waters of the ocean. However, they all understood that this wasn't the time to look into it. The group of leaders led by Loriton frantically ordered their subordinates to leave this place as soon as possible. Florida and the others had a bad premonition ever since they'd received the warning of the crossbow bolts. When they arrived in the valley and saw that the massacre had already occurred, and the explosions didn't differentiate between friend and foe, they immediately understood that Tanai's Loriton and the others had also been plotted against. Florida and the others turned pale with fright. They even thought that this was the work of one of the three empires surrounding the Valley of Sunshine. Their goal was to eradicate all the powers in the Valley of Sunshine and take complete control of the Valley of Sunshine. It was because of this that they naturally thought that the explosions were only the beginning, and that there might be a sea of soldiers from the other empires bearing their fangs at them. Therefore, when Loriton fled, they also fled in a panic. They never would have thought that this conspiracy was the work of one person, and that such a large-scale attack was the work of one person and the miraculous Earth Elite zombie. They completely lost their bearings as they fled in all directions. As the leaders of a faction, they naturally thought more, but it was a pity that not every mercenary under their command was that smart. Most of these mercenaries who lived on the edge of a knife were still simple-minded. The fierce battle with Tanai's side had caused their comrades to die one by one, and their enemies to run around them. These people didn't have the time to think and immediately attacked. Thus, even as they fled, the major powers were still locked in battle due to their unresolvable hatred. The sounds of metal clashing and the final screams of the dead continued for a long time outside the valley. However, at this moment, the instigator of all this had turned blood red and was surrounded by a strong killing intent. He was clearly on the verge of a breakthrough. On the contrary, the Demon's Lair edge hovered in the air above the valley, replacing Han Shua as the current beneficiary of all the powers. Chapter 298. Corpses were strewn all over the ravaged valley. What was even more frightening was that most of the corpses weren't complete. Their severed heads were like blood-stained rubber balls, scattered all over the valley floor. They formed a stark contrast with the enormous blood-stained rocks. Broken limbs were like powerless tree trunks, quietly lying on the valley floor that had been split into long and narrow ravines. The scene of Azura Hell was serene and bloody under the moonlight. The soul energy that hadn't yet dissipated was drawn by some sort of force from the valley cliff, spiraling from incorporeal to tangible. Wisps of soul energy fluttered into the sharp hilt of the weapon that sparkled with a dark brown luster. The demon's lair edge silently stood on top of Han Shua's head, like a loyal follower of its master. The dark brown edge didn't reflect any luster under the moonlight, but the wisps of soul energy that drifted in and met Han Shua's murderous aura caused a dazzling change. Specks of star-like light shone brightly within the blood-red aura. The dazzling specks of light were like tiny dancing spirits. After slowly blossoming beautifully for a moment, they finally completely converged into the dull brown demon's lair edge. Nearly 2,000 people had died in this battle, and every single one of them wasn't weak. Naturally, their soul energy was also very abundant. 60% of this soul energy had entered Han Shua's body, and the other 40% was being absorbed by the demon's lair edge. As the mastermind behind the scenes, Han Shua had coincidentally eavesdropped on the battle, causing all the factions in the Valley of Sunshine to suffer great losses. All the leaders were panicking and making wild guesses, which led to Han Shua's breakthrough into the Bloodlust realm and the Demon's Lair Edge's fierce aura once again. Clouds of blood-red mist were so thick that they wouldn't dissipate, forming strange lines that surrounded, entangled, and tightened around Han Shua. Within the mist, Han Shua's skin and flesh glowed with a dark red luster as his bones crackled. A terrifying aura of death, murderous aura, and murderous aura fluctuated between strong and weak. His handsome face trembled strangely. This state lasted from the long night to the scorching sun. Gradually, the entire ruined valley was shrouded in the blood-red mist. The mist was as thick as a layer of clouds, covering most of the sky above the valley. The scorching sun couldn't penetrate the obstruction of the blood clouds, but instead increased the brightness of the bloody light, causing the entire valley to seem as if it was shrouded in a bloody hell. The corpse-strewn valley seemed even more desolate, evil, and terrifying due to this layer of bloody light. For 3 days in a row, the entire Valley of Sunshine was in a constant state of anxiety and fear. The blood cloud within the valley constantly changed, until blurry, shadow-like figures slowly drifted out from the back of Han Shua's neck. These shadows that had separated from his body gradually merged with the blood cloud. Then, all sorts of grotesque, ferocious, and terrifying demon heads slowly materialized from illusory form. All of the blood clouds and blood mist merged with the shadows. After 5 days, they finally transformed into 12 monsters of different shapes, but all the same sinister appearance. These monsters either had sharp heads and claws, or densely packed fangs like sharks, or had barbs growing out of their backs like barbs. These 12 demons were completely different from each other, but they all shared the same aura. It was a unique aura that came from Han Shua's body. It was the same aura as Han Shua's. Little Skull had been hiding in the crevice of the valley all this time. It was because of this familiar aura that the Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie didn't make any unfriendly moves. Another 7 days passed. The 12 demons constantly changed their forms, sometimes even taking on the exact same appearance as Han Shua. What was even more strange was that on the 5th day, there were actually 12 identical copies of Han Shua hovering around Han Shua. On the last day, the 12 constantly changing things returned to their original appearances as if they had returned to their original form. Then, they turned into rays of blood-red light and hid within Han Shua's body. Han Shua let out a light sigh. After all the demons had hidden themselves within his body, he opened his demonic eyes and swept his gaze across the entire valley. Han Shua murmured, "I've finally reached the separate demon stage." Due to the enormous explosion, the valley had collapsed amidst the earth-shattering tremors. All of the paths into the valley had been sealed off, leaving only a sliver of sunlight in the sky. During this period of time, the Little Skeleton, Earth Elite Zombie, and Wood Elite Zombie had been guarding Han Shua with all their might. The various powers in the Valley of Sunshine had sent their spies to investigate not long after the tragedy. Unfortunately, not a single one of them had escaped alive after being ambushed by the 3 dark creatures. They'd all turned into vengeful spirits like the mercenaries in the valley, and even their corpses were quickly rotting away. The stench of Tanai's rotting corpses was truly unbearable. Han Shuo creased his brow and thought for a moment. He reached out and grabbed the demon's lair edge floating above his head. As soon as the demon's lair edge entered Han Shuo's palm, it strangely turned into specks of dark brown light and disappeared without a trace. Activating the art of the demonic ninth heavens, Han Shuo broke through the air and left this hellish valley in the blink of an eye. 5 miles north of the Valley of Sunshine, at the top of a low mountain, Loriton of the Cairo Mercenary Band, Florida of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, Adam Minlo of the House of Minlo, and the chief of the Katter Orc tribe had all gathered. The leaders of the various powers in the Valley of Sunshine, including Trunks who had just returned from a mission, were all invited. The leaders of all the powers in the Valley of Sunshine had gathered here. Everyone had ugly expressions, especially the victims who had participated in the tragedy of the Mithril mine. Their faces were especially gloomy as they tried to find the truth and seek revenge, trying to come up with a countermeasure for the future of the Valley of Sunshine. Who is it? Everyone had the same question in their hearts. Apart from the few major powers that had experienced the tragedy and suffered heavy losses, anyone who hadn't participated in the incident had become a target of suspicion. Even some of the smaller factions in the Valley of Sunshine who'd escaped faster and suffered fewer losses had become suspects. Trunks, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band didn't participate in the battle this time. Among all the powers that didn't participate in the Valley of Sunshine, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band is the strongest. Now, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band's strength isn't the slightest bit affected. Due to our heavy losses, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band's strength isn't too far off from ours. It seems that you're the biggest beneficiary this time. I'm thinking, could it be your doing? Florida of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band said sinisterly as he stared at the relaxed Trunks, his handsome face covered with a dark green hue. Trunks, who was inwardly pleased, really didn't know how to repay the mastermind behind the scenes. However, on the surface, Trunks had a pained expression and was still pretending to sigh in pain. When he heard this, he suddenly slammed the stone table and stood up angrily. The hastily assembled stone table suddenly shattered into pieces. Trunks didn't even look at the experts around him blocking the broken stones. He only glared angrily at Florida and shouted, "If you want to spout venomous slander, then we'll fight to the death right now." Half a month ago, our Soul Destroyer mercenary band accepted a mission. All the experts, including myself, left the Valley of Sunshine. Chief Loriton knows this the best. We have the least to do with this matter. Florida, everyone is here today. If you really want to kill me, then we might as well have a fair and square duel. There's no need to resort to such underhanded schemes. When Trunks had slammed his palm on the broken stone table just now, a wisp of silver radiance had appeared in his palm. Everyone present was a crafty old fox. They all knew what a silver fighting aura meant to a swordsman. Due to his own efforts and the effects of the rebirth pill, Trunks had already advanced to the great swordmaster level. All the leaders had to carefully consider whether this palm strike had any other meaning other than a show of force. During this period of time, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band had been able to openly recruit experts in the Valley of Sunshine due to Trunks' previous fame and the foundation of the original Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. They had developed at a high speed in a short period of time. If it wasn't for Tanai's tragic accident, perhaps the Soul Destroyer mercenary band wouldn't have been taken seriously by Loriton, Florida, and the others. It was a pity that Tanai's side had suffered disastrous losses. The strength they had accumulated over the past few years had been destroyed in a single day. With their sharply reduced strength, they no longer had the confidence to firmly deal with Trunks. In addition, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band was in the dark. The various powers still didn't know where their nest was. This caused the Soul Destroyer mercenary band to become a powerful existence that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the four great powers. The great Swordmaster Trunks had displayed his extraordinary strength as soon as he made his move. He had taken an unyielding and formal challenge to Florida. This attitude was clearly different from his previous concealment and obscurity. Although Florida, a light archmage, had also cultivated lightning magic, He had yet to completely recover from the serious injuries he had suffered at the hands of Han Shuwa. Florida didn't doubt that Trunks would take the opportunity to tear him to shreds when he faced Trunks, who had advanced by leaps and bounds to become a great swordsman, with Trunks' unforgettable hatred for him. Therefore, Florida's cheeks trembled with anger as he gloomily glared at Trunks. In the end, he said in a low, stiff voice, "The most important thing right now is to find the mastermind behind the scenes. I don't have the time to fight with you right now." When these words were spoken, all those in power in the Valley of Sunshine understood one fact. Florida was afraid. Almost as soon as Lorton's words fell, the eyes of Adam Minlow and Catter, who'd originally been following Florida's lead, immediately shot out a glint of ambition. The two of them were silent for a while and looked at each other. They didn't look at Florida's desperate wink and actually agreed very readily. The leaders of the small forces that were originally tied to Lorton hesitated for a moment before nodding their heads one by one. When Trunks saw that most of them were nodding their heads in agreement, he also gladly agreed. When everyone's gazes landed on Florida, who originally had the highest chance of obtaining this power as long as Adam Minlow and Catter supported him, could only agree bitterly in his heart even though he secretly cursed all the relatives of his two previous allies. Even he, Florida, had no choice but to submit to the irresistible trend. Very good, then we can discuss the details now and even draft up an agreement. All the forces in the Valley of Sunshine will be supervisors to prevent anyone from going back on their word when the time comes. Lorton's face darkened as he grinned and proposed in all seriousness. This kind of agreement was as laughable as a prostitute saying she was still a virgin. However, there were times when it was necessary. Although everyone understood that the agreement would immediately be torn apart as long as one side was strong enough, it still needed a ceremony after all. Especially when everyone had a hidden enemy, this would always give them some psychological comfort. Therefore, the major forces in the Valley of Sunshine, each with their own ulterior motives, came to an agreement that they had to abide by in such a place. All parties would temporarily stop fighting and fully focus on tracking down the mastermind behind the scenes. After learning everything from Trunks, Han Shuwa gave a strange, non-committal chuckle. He didn't give any explanation to Trunks and quietly left the Valley of Sunshine, this enormous maelstrom that everyone thought of as the mastermind. Trunks' heart trembled slightly at Han Shua's hair-raising smile before he left. He looked at the trace of pride in Han Shua's eyes that was difficult to detect, yet also seemed to be deliberately revealed. He suddenly seemed to have grasped something. However, Trunks didn't ask any questions. Instead, after Han Shua left, he led the Soul Destroyer mercenary band to carry out the magnificent feat of searching for the culprit with great fanfare. He appeared to be even more diligent than Lorton and the others. However, during this process, Trunks, who was openly searching for the culprit, took advantage of the convenience of coming and going to continue his shady business of recruiting soldiers. The Soul Destroyer mercenary band, which had ample funds and was gradually becoming famous, actually attracted quite a few strong experts to join them. After leaving the Valley of Sunshine for 7 days, Han Shuo returned to Asan City. He gave some instructions to the housekeeper of his mansion, then secretly left through the Dark Mantle's transportation matrix. Bretel City wasn't a solid city. Due to the habitual weakness of the previous city lords when facing the invasion of the 7 Grand Duchies, Bretel City's city guards had become a motley crew. Once a true attack descended, the soldiers, who knew how to preserve their strength, would always flee faster than the civilians. It was precisely because Bretel City was habitually breached that the Lancelot Empire didn't dare to spend a huge amount of money to build a transportation matrix within the city. After all, once the Grand Duchies occupied Bretel City, if there was a transportation matrix within the city that led to other places, no one could guarantee that the invaders of the 7 Grand Duchies wouldn't be able to easily enter the other cities and towns of the Lancelot Empire through the transportation matrix. Bretel City was indeed barren, but the Lancelot Empire also had many rich and prosperous cities. If these invaders really did enter the other cities and towns of the Lancelot Empire in large numbers through the transportation matrix, then no one dared to imagine the damage that could be caused. Therefore, as a city that was almost abandoned, this double-edged sword of the Transportation Matrix project had always been in a state of limitless shelving. Spring has truly arrived, but it's a pity that the scenery isn't pleasant at all. Han Shuo muttered to himself as he sat in a carriage, gazing at the scenery along the way through the opened carriage curtain. Starting from the Transportation Matrix in Seamus City, which was close to Bretel City, Han Shuo had been sitting in the carriage as it slowly drove towards Bretel City. Along the way, beggars wrapped in cloth loitered all over the place. Flies fluttered in the air above the conspicuous corpses on the side of the official road, causing a choking stench to persist. Seamus City was a well-defended and wealthy city in the east of the Lancelot Empire. However, the miserable scene on the road from Seamus City to Bretel City was as different as heaven and earth from the Seamus City he'd just left. During the 3 days of travel, Han Shuo had already discovered more than 10 bandits causing trouble through the demons. These bandits were only local bandits of the Lancelot Empire. They weren't fake bandits like those from the 7 Grand Duchies, who might have regular soldiers disguised as bandits. Even the tenacious Han Shuo couldn't help but be a bit stunned by the various tragic scenes. Along the way, Han Shuo had personally killed no less than 50 beasts in human skin. Brian, I didn't think that your territory would be this kind of place. The scenery along the way is enough to challenge one's nerves. I think that Bretel City will also make you feel embarrassed. Chester, who was determined to follow Han Shuo no matter what, had given up a good mission led by Emily and willingly acted as a coachman to stick to Han Shuo, insisting on coming to this notoriously chaotic and filthy Bretel City. Chuckling lightly, Han Shuo looked playfully at the courageous Chester and asked, "Chester, why do you insist on following me, even when I've refused?" Chester, who was focused on acting as a coachman, had already become extraordinarily resilient along the way. He whipped the warhorse fiercely, stopping the extraordinary warhorse's curiosity towards a corpse in the grass on the left. He replied like a philosopher, "If you want to obtain more things, not only do you need perseverance and indomitable will, you also need at least a little bit of foresight." Interesting thinking. Han Shuo responded to Chester's reply with a faint smile. His eyes calmly watched the civilians around him fiercely fighting over a piece of bread. His voice was elegant, gentle, and indifferent. The situation in Bretel City was so bad that apart from some of the original residents who were unwilling to leave their ancestral lands, some special merchants who tried to use violence, and the nobles and soldiers who couldn't leave due to their duties, the rest of the civilians were trying their best to break free from the shackles of sin. They desperately wanted to enter the rich and peaceful Seamus City. However, the road to Seamus City wasn't peaceful. Even if they risked their lives to reach the city gates, they would still be mercilessly turned away if they didn't have an expensive entrance fee. These civilians of the Lancelot Empire would be left to fend for themselves. After all, the poor civilians would only become the most despicable and unstable beggars in Seamus City. With Seamus City's capacity, it couldn't have too many beggars that would affect the city's image. Therefore, even the nobles and merchants could enter the city. The civilians of Bretel City who could prove that they had the ability to live could also enter after paying a considerable fee. Otherwise, even if they died outside Seamus City's gates, the guards wouldn't feel the slightest bit of pity. "So this is my territory. I've finally arrived." Han Shuo muttered to himself as he gazed at the wide-open Bretel City in front of the dilapidated city gates. Chapter 300. A carriage that couldn't be considered extravagant sped through the dilapidated city gate. There were few people on the streets. Occasionally, 1 or 2 people could be seen with eyes full of resentment and despair. This was a silent protest against their miserable lives. Bretel City was just as dirty as Han Shuo had expected. The scenery was only slightly better than what he'd seen along the way. A few lazy soldiers watched the carriage enter the city indifferently. They actually didn't question him about his origins or urge him to pay the entrance fee. It looked like Bretel City was indeed on the verge of death. "Hey, may I ask where the city lord's mansion is?" Chester pulled on the reins and asked a commoner who looked like a beggar with a smile. The commoner lay lazily under the sun, picking at the fleas on his body. He didn't even raise his head as if he hadn't heard Chester's question. 1 silver coin. Where is the city lord's mansion? Chester, who'd been born in poverty, had a good understanding of the temperament of these poor people. He asked with a smile again. Sure enough, adding a silver coin immediately produced an effect. The beggar who'd just been deaf seemed to smell the alluring scent of gold. He suddenly focused all his attention on Chester and pointed in the direction of East Street, saying, Go straight for 300 meters. The tallest and most dilapidated mansion is the city lord's mansion. A silver coin glittered under the sunlight as it rolled down to the ground in front of the beggar. Chester didn't thank him. He only jerked his warhorse and the carriage slowly left, heading straight for the city lord's mansion. The beggar hurriedly picked up the silver coin and clutched it tightly in his palm. He then looked in the direction the two had left in and murmured, Someone actually came to Brettel City. If it's not a profiteering merchant, then it's that legendary unlucky count. What a pitiful fellow. Once Brettel City was invaded, the city lord's mansion would become the focus of attention. The walls of the tall building weren't sturdy, and there were even a few holes that hadn't been repaired from the explosions. When Han Shua's carriage entered, there were only less than 5 maids and a dozen or so soldiers. These maids and soldiers looked at Han Shua coldly. They did not have the enthusiasm that a subordinate should have. Of course, it was even more impossible for them to welcome Han Shua at a banquet that was normally held in other regions. The city lord's mansion was at least 5 times larger than Han Shua's mansion in Asan City. However, this city lord's mansion didn't have any good points apart from its large size. Because the city lord was always the first to leave after every invasion, the city lord's mansion that didn't have any soldiers stationed there was often the first to be looted. Some of the things that the city lord couldn't take away for the time being had been completely obliterated in the repeated attacks. The funny thing was that Han Shua actually saw a piece of white jade floor being taken away, leaving behind a large square hole in the ground. This allowed Han Shua to imagine the true situation of Brettel City. Can you tell me about the current situation in Brettel City? Han Shua asked Dick, the person in charge of the Dark Mantle, after hearing the news and sitting down in the dilapidated hall at the center of the city lord's mansion. Dick was a man in his 40s. His appearance was ordinary, with only the bridge of his nose appearing rather high. This was a characteristic of the mountain people of Brettel City. Dick respectfully saluted Han Shua, speaking in a somewhat awkward imperial language. When the previous city lord of Brettel City left, he took with him a total of 500 family soldiers. Currently, there are only 3,000 soldiers in the entire Brettel City, and less than 50,000 residents in the city. 3,000 soldiers is simply not enough to guard Brettel City's city gates. Not to mention that these soldiers often escape faster than the civilians. Brettel City's defenses have been damaged time and time again. Without funds to repair them, the city has almost lost its defensive capabilities. The true local mountain people of Brettel City mostly live on the steep mountains around the city. These mountains produce some valuable ores. Since the mountain people are very familiar with the terrain of the mountains, coupled with the fact that the mountains are indeed very difficult to attack, they have been able to resist every invasion by the 7 Grand Duchies. Up until now, Brettel City has actually been relatively safe. This is because the 7 Grand Duchies have experienced dozens of large and small invasions. They all understand that there's no more profit to be reaped from Brettel City. To them, wasting time to plunder Brettel City is no longer able to reap the rewards they deserve. Therefore, there haven't been any more invasions in the past few months. On the contrary, the mines guarded by the mountain people in the mountains around Brettel City have become the targets of attacks by bandits and private soldiers. However, the mountain people are not as incompetent as the Empire's soldiers because they have the geographical advantage. Up until now, they have been able to barely pass through the mountains at the speed of a turtle. Han Shua gradually gained an understanding of the situation in Brettel City under Dick's introduction. When Dick finished, Han Shua glanced at a soldier in the city lord's mansion and said, "Summon all the soldiers of Brettel City to the front of the city lord's mansion. I want to see what these soldiers look like." "Yes, Lord Count." The soldier replied lazily, riding a weak and thin horse at a moderate pace out of the city lord's mansion. My lord, you will be disappointed. Dick shook his head and sighed as he said to Han Shuo, I know. However, I want to make sure that I won't be disappointed in the future. Han Shuo said with a light smile, then furrowed his brows in silence. After nearly 2 hours, the soldiers scattered all over Bretel City gathered in front of the city lord's mansion at a moderate pace, with no order or military discipline. None of these soldiers were very strong. Perhaps it was because of the food they ate, but they had a sickly complexion. That kind of sloppy mental state without a trace of a soldier's spirit was proof that their combat strength was bound to collapse at the first blow. The longswords, bows, and spears in their hands were all rusted and of inferior quality. Han Shuo even felt that a sharp weapon forged by the dwarves could break all of their weapons. Only a third of these 3,000 soldiers were young men in the prime of their lives. The rest were old men past their prime. Who could count on these people to have any fighting strength? Han Shuo stood on the high platform of the city lord's mansion for a while, pondering for a while with a calm face. He grinned maliciously and said, From today onwards, your good days are over. All soldiers over the age of 50 will be expelled from this troop. I will guarantee that these people will have a normal life. The remaining soldiers will be given enough food to fill their stomachs. You will also be given brand new weapons, armor, and warhorses. Of course, you will also be tortured by cruel training. When the next invader comes, you will wash away the previous shame with blood. With me here, Bretel City will change. The elderly soldiers below were incessantly clamoring. They were indifferent to Han Shuo's proposal to have them leave the army, but were full of doubts about Han Shuo's guarantee of food and clothing. The young soldiers looked at each other in dismay, slowly pondering the meaning behind Han Shuo's words. They didn't know what he wanted to do. Beside Han Shuo, Dick, the person in charge of the Dark Mantle here, looked at Han Shuo in astonishment and asked, My Lord Count, are you serious? Your lordship, even if we have more than 1,000 people with weapons and warhorses, do you think that we can withstand the attack of 10 to 20,000 bandits, or the 30 to 50,000 regular soldiers of the 7 Grand Duchies with such a dilapidated city wall? A soldier with a rough appearance and a full beard shouted as he looked up at Han Shuo. This isn't something you should care about. As a soldier, if you can't stop the enemy's invasion, then use your own heads to wash away the shame of failure. If you dare to struggle at death's door and flee, I'll personally slit your necks. Han Shuo looked coldly at the brawny man and berated, City Lord, I think you should leave this place as soon as possible. This place has already been abandoned by the Empire. Chapter 301. Bretel City had become somewhat different. The commoners in the city dressed like beggars often saw scenes that were different from the past. The soldiers who used to live like cowardly worms in Bretel City were now full of vigor, as if possessed by ghosts and gods. They would actually line up in neat lines, panting and running while carrying heavy loads, or practice sword skills in the city lord's mansion that had been repaired. These originally cowardly and incompetent soldiers had a trembling and fearful expression on their faces, but under the ruthless training of a team of silver-armored knights, they gradually gained a bit more backbone. Their originally sallow and emaciated faces also gained a bit more firm lines. These changes happened inadvertently. Not only did the soldiers in the city change, but other places in Bretel City also had subtle changes. For example, the broken city gates and broken city walls had been repaired by some retired soldiers who had spent a lot of time. The city lord's mansion in particular seemed to have suddenly regained its vitality. The people coming and going were actually a bit disorderly. The commoners of Bretel City, whose hearts were like dead ashes, didn't feel much when they saw these changes. They were used to the city lord being the first to run away, so they didn't feel that these changes would have any effect. On the contrary, they had some malicious guesses that these actions might bring harm to them. The bandits and soldiers of the 7 Grand Duchies, who hadn't visited the city for a few months, might think that there was more profit to be made from the changes in the city. If they were in the mood to come here and plunder again, it would be another miserable experience. Inside the city lord's mansion, Han Shuo slowly walked out of his secret room one morning. Falk, Dick, and Chester were waiting in the living room. Han Shuo looked at the three of them and moved his space ring. Shining weapons and bags of food slowly piled up. He looked at Falk and said, "Make full use of these weapons and chariots. You also have to control the food. In addition, from today onwards, as long as it's a young and strong commoner, you can join the army. Apart from a guaranteed food allowance, each person will be temporarily given 1 gold coin each month." As an Earth Rider, Falk naturally had extraordinary abilities since he was able to be arranged by Lawrence. During this period of time, Falk had already killed a few of the soldiers due to the high-intensity training. However, the deaths of these soldiers had an immediate effect. In a short period of time, all the soldiers truly understood the cruelty of training. Not a single one dared to make up the numbers. During the day, Falk madly drilled these soldiers, and at night, he even lectured some high-ranking soldiers on military strategy. Han Shuo had listened for a few days and felt that he had benefited greatly. He felt that this Falk was indeed a trustworthy officer. Understood. Falk wasn't a person who liked to talk too much. Under normal circumstances, he had an old-fashioned look on his face. He had a straightforward and hot-blooded aura that was ingrained in his bones as a soldier. "Dick, have there been any abnormalities in the vicinity recently?" Han Shuo asked with a smile as he glanced at Dick, the person in charge of the Dark Mantle's operations here. "My Lord Count, apart from some commoners who don't understand your actions, there hasn't been anything out of the ordinary around Brettel City. However, according to our Dark Mantle's observations, I believe that a group of bandits will arrive in the next few days. Of course, their target should only be the mountain people on Mount Tali near Brettel City." Dick replied courteously. Although the soldiers of Brettel City were cowardly and incompetent, the Dark Mantle was still operating normally. There were Dark Star envoys hiding in the surrounding mountains. Nodding, Han Shuo said with interest, "Very good. Keep a close eye on this matter. You must find out when those bandits will return, as well as their numbers and movement routes." Falk, perhaps we should also test out these soldiers. If we don't give them a bit of stimulation, I think it will be very difficult for them to truly grow. "My lord, your words make a lot of sense. I will make them more spirited," Falk replied. 3 days later, on Mount Tali to the southwest of Brettel City, a battle that frequently occurred was currently playing out. Redbeard Troda was leading 4,000 fierce bandits, recklessly charging up Mount Tali. The mountain people hiding in the rocks, trees, and shrubs on the winding mountain path used bows and arrows to obstruct the bandits from ascending the mountain. The mountain people had long since gotten used to this kind of attack and naturally had their own way of dealing with it. The falling rocks and arrows caused quite a bit of damage to the bandits. The mountain people hiding behind the rocks were much braver than the soldiers of Brettel City. They didn't fear the bandits' attacks at all and used all kinds of attacks to attack the invaders. "Falk, do you think these bandits will be able to win?" At the foot of Mount Tali, Han Shuo was a distance away from the bandits. He turned his head to look at Falk and asked. Shaking his head, Falk calmly replied, "Impossible. Although Redbeard Troda has more bandits, it's a pity that the mountain people of Mount Tali occupy the terrain. In addition, they've long since gotten used to fighting on the mountain. It's impossible for warhorses to travel on the rugged mountain path, and Troda doesn't have the determination to fight to the death. This battle is destined to be fruitless. Only 100 of the 4,000 fierce bandits have died. Falk, do you think we have any hope of getting rid of them?" Han Shuo asked again. "That's also impossible. The path below Mount Tali is flat, and we don't have any terrain that we can use to our advantage. In addition, these soldiers haven't been trained for long. I don't think they have the courage to face the Redbeard bandits immediately. Not to mention we only have 1,300 people. My lord, this isn't a good idea." Falk was shocked and immediately tried to persuade Han Shuo. Unfortunately, Han Shuo didn't listen to Falk's advice. He laughed mischievously. "Falk, you've forgotten that I'm an Archmage Necromancer. Archmage Necromancers should be most proficient in this kind of large-scale battle. Not to mention, there aren't any outstanding light Archmages among these bandits. I think we can give it a try." Before Falk could stop him again, Han Shuo had already walked out with a smile. As he walked towards the Redbeard bandits, Han Shuo ordered, "Attack with me. I think you know what to do." Han Shuo took out the skeletal staff from his space ring and chanted a low incantation. Dark creatures appeared one after another. With the existence of the skeletal staff, the power of a summoning spell was doubled. With the 10 evil knights in the lead, 50 hate warriors, 200 zombie warriors, 700 skeletal warriors, and 300 gargoyles were summoned by Han Shuo using the skeletal staff and expending a large amount of mental strength. More than 1,200 dark creatures, including the terrifyingly powerful evil knights and hate warriors, as well as the fiercely whistling gargoyles, lined up neatly and marched towards the bandits under the command of Han Shuo's skeletal staff. When Fox saw that so many dark creatures had appeared under Han Shuo's incantation in just a few short minutes, Fox's expression became somewhat dazed. Only when Han Shuo's figure was about to disappear from his line of sight did he suddenly react. He abruptly roared at the fearful soldiers behind him. "Today is the day to test the results of your training. You've all seen the City Lord's methods. I don't doubt that he has the strength to kill all of you by himself. Any coward will meet a miserable end. Therefore, all of you can only listen to my command and attack." When the originally trembling soldiers heard Fox roar and saw the sinister expression on Han Shuo's face as he brandished the skeletal staff, their hearts suddenly turned cold. Courage and fear strangely converged together, and all of them inexplicably gained the courage to fight. They tightly gripped the weapons in their hands, their gazes resolute. They were prepared to not fall into the hands of the City Lord even if they had to die in battle. The little skeleton, whose body was covered in sparkling white bones, rode a peculiar undead creature that was 5 meters long and 3 meters tall. Its body was covered in sharp bone spurs. This creature looked like a giant hedgehog that had been magnified 1,000 times. It dragged a tail that was covered in thorns and thorns. It only had a single grayish-white eye that emitted a deathly stillness. The Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie were each riding a fire-spitting, black-armored warhorse that only evil knights could possess. They stood on either side of Little Skull. The 3 little things were actually even more arrogant than the 10 evil knights. They actually appeared at the very front of the group. What was strange was that the 10 evil knights didn't show any dissatisfaction and obediently followed behind Little Skull and the other 2. "Wow, what's that?" A cowardly bandit at the back suddenly heard a muffled sound behind him. He turned his head and was immediately dumbfounded, screaming out loud. The sullen and irritated Redbeard Troda stood on a rock and roared. When he heard his subordinate's shouts, he immediately cursed, "Stupid pigs, charge up! Boss behind! Look behind you!" The bandit was frightened out of his wits as he pointed anxiously behind him and screamed. Troda raised his head and saw a dark aura of death rush towards him. A dense horde of undead creatures with an icy aura that didn't exist in this world were marching towards them. These Bretel City soldiers looked fearfully at City Lord Han Shuo floating in the middle of the undead army. They seemed to remember Han Shuo's ruthlessness. None of them dared to cower. "Prepare the crossbows and arrows. Shoot them to death. You bunch of idiots. Focus all your attention." Falk couldn't help but curse loudly when he saw that the soldiers on the battlefield still dared to be distracted and look around. The soldiers, who were used to being cursed, raised the bows and arrows in their hands amidst the curses. They aimed at the Redbeard bandits charging from the foot of the mountain and fired wildly. Although these people's aim wasn't very good, the Redbeard bandits were too densely packed together. As long as the strength of the arrows was enough, they would draw blood when they landed in the swarming crowd. On one side were soldiers who had just been trained for a short period of time and dared to resist the bandits for the first time. On the other side were a group of hot-tempered bandits who didn't know how to fight at all. As the defenders, the arrows and crossbow bolts in the hands of the soldiers had indeed received quite a bit of lethality. Rows and rows of arrows rained down, and more than 300 bandits were killed just like that. Another 500 to 600 bandits were either lightly or heavily injured. The bandits finally charged from the foot of the mountain after paying the price of 300 lives. At this time, the bandits had 2 choices. They could either attack the Bretel soldiers on the left, or the slowly advancing undead army in front of them. Troda was extremely furious at this moment. He finally recognized that the ones who dared to attack his subordinates were actually the cowardly soldiers of Bretel City. This group of Bretel City soldiers who always fled like dogs had always been a laughing stock among the other Grand Duchies and bandits. However, these soldiers had actually dared to pick up their weapons and attack his subordinates at this time. They'd even caused quite a bit of damage. This was an unforgivable insult to Redbeard Troda. Therefore, Troda, who'd charged from the foot of the mountain, immediately roared madly, "Brothers, chop up this group of bastards." Troda once again took the lead and roared angrily as he charged towards Fox's group of soldiers. He didn't attack the undead creatures in front of him like he'd originally planned. However, even though he didn't attack the undead creatures, the dark creatures controlled by Han Shuo and Little Skull wouldn't let them off in a friendly manner. When the dark green canopy of necromancy covered the bright red light of the evening, a thick aura of death slowly spread out from the canopy of necromancy. The bones of the undead creatures that bathed in the canopy of necromancy all shone with an evil luster. Their slow-moving attack speed suddenly increased by 3 times. Even the sluggish hate warriors started moving as fast as gargoyles. Following a string of cryptic and profound magic incantations, gray liquid rippled out from the water and poured down from the sky. The path the bandits took towards Fox's group of soldiers was filled with acidic swamps that were emitting green smoke. The bandits who'd rashly stepped into the acid swamps suddenly howled miserably. Under the corrosion of the acid swamps, their skin and flesh rapidly fell off from their bones. In the blink of an eye, 50 to 60 living skeletons of all shapes and sizes appeared in the acid swamps. "Damn it! Avoid those things that are emitting green smoke," Troda shouted loudly, then glared angrily at Han Shuo, who'd gracefully released necromancy magic. He roared, "Evil necromancer, why do you have to be enemies with us? I've never offended you." Temporarily halting his incantation, Han Shuo glanced at Troda with interest. A charming smile appeared on his face as he said softly, "Bretel City is my territory. Do you think you've offended me by burning, killing, and looting in my territory? Haha, so you're that unlucky new city lord. Do you think Bretel City is Seamus City? Do you think a necromancer like you can change the situation in such an abandoned place?" Troda actually mocked when he saw Han Shuo reveal his identity. "How would I know if I don't try?" Han Shuo replied with a light smile. He pointed the skeletal staff in his hand at Troda and ordered, "Children, tear them apart." Little Skull, who was riding on the enormous undead creature, emitted a hazy purple light from his purple demon eye. He glanced at the undead creatures that were swarming towards Troda, his empty right hand abruptly slapping the undead creature beneath him. This undead creature that looked like an enormous hedgehog suddenly shook out 3 pairs of 5-meter-long wings that seemed to be made of green rotting flesh. The enormous undead creature flapped its green wings and directly carried Little Skull into the air, sweeping towards Troda. This was like a bugle call to charge. As soon as Little Skull and the undead creature flew away, the group of gargoyles circling above quickly flapped their bat-like wings and closely followed behind the undead creature covered in spikes, attacking Redbeard Troda's bandits. Floating in the air, Han Shuo sized up the spike-covered undead creature through the Een demon. He didn't know why, but he felt that the densely packed snow-white bone spikes on its body was somewhat familiar. After carefully examining it through the Een demon, Han Shuo suddenly recalled the bone spikes from super-rank magical creatures that Little Skull and the Earth Elite Zombie had collected in the Forbidden Land. Those bone spikes that contained a strange energy were shockingly similar to the spikes on this undead creature. Could it be that this undead creature that I've never seen before was refined by Little Skull? This thought suddenly welled up in Han Shuo's mind for no reason, but was immediately rejected by Han Shuo with a shake of his head. This idea was too outrageous. As a Little Skull that he'd refined, it shouldn't have such a strange ability. Don't kill him. I want that leader alive. Riding on the strange, undead creature, Little Skull quickly flew above Troda. Han Shuo suddenly shouted as he watched Little Skull and the undead creature swoop down towards him. From Dick, Han Shuan knew that this bandit named Troda had looted Bredel City many times in the past few years. Han Shua wanted this bandit leader, who'd raked in so much wealth, to spit out all the wealth he'd swallowed. After all, Bredel City currently needed a large amount of gold coins. Just the 200,000 gold coins that they'd brought over wasn't enough to sustain the city. Chapter 303. The undead creature that had been charging towards Troda was patted by Little Skull after Han Shua's shout. Little Skull and his mount suddenly changed directions, circling around Troda and charging into the dense group of bandits. Troda yelled as he shot out rows of arrows. A few of them landed on the undead creature, but unfortunately, they didn't pose any hindrance to it. The undead creature resembling a porcupine charged into the dense group of bandits under Little Skull's control. This powerful undead creature landed in the middle of the bandits, its sharp spikes piercing through 5 bandits. 3 of them were torn apart by the spikes, while the other 2 were sent flying through the air. 300 gargoyles whizzed over, flapping their bat-like wings as they swarmed forward. Dozens of bandits didn't even have time to defend before they were torn into a bloody mess by their hook-like claws. The dark creatures that couldn't fly, under the lead of the Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie, joined forces with 10 evil knights on fire-breathing black armored beasts and landed in the middle of Troda's red-bearded bandits. More than 1,000 undead creatures of all kinds charged directly into the middle of the bandits. These undead creatures that didn't fear death didn't feel any pain at all. They either used the sharp weapons in their hands or their claws and teeth to launch a frenzied attack on the bandits. Among them, the skeletal warriors were the weakest. Their bones would often shatter under the powerful bombardment. Apart from this, the higher-ranked zombie warriors' bodies were already very sturdy. The strength of the iron rods they wielded was also very fierce, often giving the bandits a lot of trouble. As for the enormous hate warriors, they were even more difficult to deal with. It often took 4 or 5 bandits working together to barely resist them. Apart from light magic, only fire and lightning magic could harm these powerful undead creatures. Even if some ordinary physical attacks broke the hate warriors' arms and legs, they still couldn't stop their attacks. 10 of the most valiant evil knights raised their enormous white-bone spikes. Each one of them possessed great destructive power. With a wave of the enormous white-bone spikes, 5 or 6 bandits would be swept to death. The black armor formed by the strange minerals in the Death Abyss was much more resistant to magic than the normal armor in this world. Undead creatures were strange existences that were not easily harmed by physical attacks, so these 10 evil knights were a nightmare for bandits. They couldn't seem to find a way to deal with them. Han Shua, who was suspended in the void, waved his skeletal staff and chanted a cryptic spell. The greenish-black canopy of undead was shrouded in a dense death aura. Ripples spread into the air and formed acidic swamps. Undead creatures didn't pose any hindrance to the acid swamp, but once a living person without an aura of death fell into the acid swamp, their skin and flesh would immediately melt. "You damned stupid pigs! Do you only know how to watch from the side?" Falk cursed loudly and pointed his silver spear at the bandits. He roared, "Aim and shoot!" There were more than 4,000 savage bandits, and their strength couldn't be underestimated. Han Shua had also summoned more than 1,000 undead creatures, but most of them were the lowest-level skeleton warriors. However, these skeleton warriors were the weakest in terms of battle strength and often couldn't pose any real threat to the bandits. Therefore, it was impossible for the undead creatures to completely annihilate this group of 4,000 bandits with just the few hate warriors and evil knights. Falk roared as rows of arrows landed among the bandits and even the undead creatures. For high-level undead creatures like the hate warriors and evil knights, a few arrows wouldn't cause them any harm. Therefore, even if their attacks missed, they wouldn't cause much damage to the undead creatures. The novice archers heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that the hate warriors were still able to attack the living people around them without any problems even after a few arrows pierced into their bodies. They were able to fire freely. Now that they no longer had any worries, the archery skills they gradually grasped during their daily training slowly came into play. More and more of the Redbeard bandits were killed under the rain of arrows. Han Shuo, who'd been coldly observing the entire battle situation, suddenly had a thought. The magic that had been scattering through the acid swamp temporarily stopped, and a narrow, winding path appeared from Trota's side to Fawkes' side. The narrow path could only fit 3 or 4 people, but it seemed to leave some hope of attacking Fawkes' group. Attack! Kill these damned, cowardly soldiers of Bretel City. Trota pointed at Fawkes. The bandits that had surrounded him charged towards Fawkes with Trota in the rain of arrows. The soldiers, who'd gradually gotten used to the oncoming charge, mercilessly sent even more arrows towards Trota's group. The charging bandits fell to the ground like porcupines, their bodies full of arrows, javelins, and spears. Their deaths were also strange. On the mountainside of Mount Tali, the leader of the mountain people, Fulkin, who was tall and had a high-nosed bridge, wore a set of armor that was not considered rare. He looked at the chaotic battle at the foot of the mountain in confusion and said, "What's going on?" Fulkin was the leader of the mountain people on Mount Tali. He lived on Mount Tali for the past few years, exchanging or for daily necessities. This group of about 1,000 mountain people had been reduced to less than 600 in the constant fighting. If it wasn't for the mountain's terrain, they would have long since been breached by the bandits. I don't know who that necromancer is, but those soldiers should be from Bretel City. Oh, how dare these Bretel City vermin take up weapons? My eyes must be playing tricks on me. The old miner Turiev stood on tiptoe on a tall rock, looking down with the same puzzlement. I've heard that Bretel City has a new city lord. Does this new city lord really want to change Bretel City? Fulkin couldn't help but exclaim softly, astonishment in his eyes. Rumor has it that the new city lord is called Brian. He seems to be a necromancer and has even killed a great swordmaster of the Brute Merchant Alliance. He's a demon who's challenged many experts of the Empire. No one has been able to escape from his palms, leaving no one alive in every battle. Turiev couldn't help but remind Fulkin when he'd heard some news from Asen City from some merchants who'd recently come over. As the master of the mountain people on Mount Tali, Fulkin thought for a moment with a dark expression, then said, "That damned bandit Trota has killed many of our people. Even my younger brother died in his hands. No matter what, Trota's situation isn't looking good now. It looks like we don't need to stay on the mountain to defend." Fulkin, you mean we should charge down the mountain and fight to the death with Trota? Turiev was startled and asked. Nodding, Fulkin snorted and suddenly shouted, "Perhaps today is the day for us to take our revenge. That damned bandit Trota has killed too many of our people. Don't let him leave Mount Tali alive." Fulkin walked out from behind the rock after he finished speaking and charged towards the parties fighting at the foot of the mountain. The mountain people who'd been hiding among the rocks and shrubs suddenly erupted with accumulated hatred when they heard Fulkin's words. They followed behind Fulkin and charged towards Fawkes' group. For Fulkin and the others, it was best not to get too close to strange existences like the undead creatures. After all, these creatures didn't belong to this world. It would be a waste if they attacked them as well. In addition, there were many acid swamps of various sizes in the middle of the undead creatures. Dozens of white skeletons that had just shed their skin and flesh could be seen in the acid swamps. This horrifying scene was extremely shocking to them. They naturally wouldn't want to come to such a dangerous place. Whoosh whoosh, 2 bone spears shot out of nowhere. Trota, who was advancing, suddenly felt pain in his legs. Then, dozens of gargoyles swarmed him. Before he could react, they grabbed him with their iron claws and spiraled him into the sky. "I'm the new city lord of Bretel City. My name is Brian. Nice to meet you, Trota." Han Shua's voice sounded courteously. When Trota reacted, he found that Han Shua was looking at him with a faint smile. For Gargoyle's iron claws had pierced through his back. The 4 gargoyles flapped their wings to keep him from falling to his death. "What do you want?" Trota was indeed a bandit leader. Even though his back was dripping with blood and in great pain, Trota's expression was still fierce as he glared angrily at Han Shua and roared, "I don't want anything, I just want all your wealth. Everything you've plundered from Bretel City all these years, spit it all out." Han Shuo was in a good mood as he chuckled lightly. Just kill me. I won't give it to you even if I die. Haha, you won't be able to obtain that wealth. Troda laughed maniacally, as if he didn't know how to spell the word death. 3 bone spears pierced through Troda's abdomen and chest. Han Shuo smiled faintly. You seem to have forgotten that I'm a necromancer. Necromancers not only have powerful control over dark creatures, but are also very familiar with souls. Even if you die, I can still obtain everything from your soul. When the sunlight shone down, the corrosive liquid of the acid swamp gradually sank into the ground. The white skeletons that had been maintaining their strange postures cracked and shattered with a loud rumble. The outcome of the battle had been decided, and there were no more surprises. Of the 4,000-plus bandits in this battle, over 2,700 had died here. The rest had fled in a sorry state without a trace. All the spoils of war of the dead bandits had been gathered up and handed over to Falk for safekeeping. Nearly 200 of the Brettel City recruits who'd participated in this battle had died in the face of the savage bandits' attacks. On the other hand, only 50 of Fulkin's mountain people had died. This was enough to prove that this group of cowardly soldiers had very poor combat ability. Respected Lord Count, thank you for your help. Fulkin arrived in front of Han Shuo after the dust had settled and bowed respectfully towards Han Shuo. No need to be polite. Mount Tali belongs to Brettel City. As the city lord, I have the responsibility to protect your safety. Han Shuo replied with a smile, then added, I hope this is a good start. Brettel City is also your hometown. I don't think you have to stay in Mount Tali forever. Perhaps we will return to Brettel City, but now isn't the best time. Lord Count will surely understand our concerns. A single battle wouldn't be able to make Fulkin feel at ease. Fulkin definitely wouldn't dare to take the risk before Brettel City displayed its formidable military strength. Nodding, Han Shuo smiled. You will see the changes in Brettel City in the future. All right, today's matter ends here. I still have other matters to take care of. Ignoring Fulkin, Han Shuo walked over to Falk and instructed him to clean up the battlefield. He then left by himself, heading in the direction of Helen Duchy. Han Shuo had already learned the location of the bandit Troda's hidden wealth. Apart from the few crystal cards in his space ring, Troda hadn't sold the rare jewels and ores he'd plundered over the years. Instead, he'd buried them in a barren mountain. Troda had originally been a criminal of Helen Duchy. Due to the succession of Helen Duchy's Grand Duchess Helentina, he'd been pardoned and released. Troda had left the prison and returned to the free world he'd been away from for many years to become a bandit. However, even though Troda had been wreaking havoc all over the place, he still couldn't forget his hometown. He'd hidden his wealth in a barren mountain not far from his hometown. The current Grand Duchess of Helen Duchy, Helentina, was rumored to be an enchanting woman. This woman's methods were exceptional. She'd sat on the position of Grand Duchess under the covetous eyes of many uncles, becoming the de facto ruler of Helen Duchy. None of the uncles who'd fought with her for power had escaped her grasp. They'd all been killed after she'd ascended to the position. Helen Duchy, humph! Han Shuo snorted coldly as he flew through the dusky sky, secretly considering when to make a move against Helen Duchy. Although Helentina was a woman, Helen Duchy was in her hands. Those troops didn't have any benevolent hearts. Among the 7 Grand Duchies' invasions of Brettel City, Helen Duchy was equally frequent. Helen Duchy was located to the northeast of Brettel City. It was more than 700 kilometers away from Brettel City. It would take a day to reach the duchy on horseback, but Han Shuo only spent about an hour using the art of the demonic ninth heavens. When Han Shuo arrived at the barren mountain, he discovered that a large-scale battle involving 4 duchies was currently in full swing. Helentina, whom Han Shuo had just secretly cursed, was valiantly sitting on a fiery red phoenix, calmly commanding the soldiers to attack. Chapter 305. The 7 Grand Duchies were Helentina's Helen Duchy, Alec Ambridge's Bavenden Duchy, Bert Zeely's Ballet Duchy, Randy Allad's Bonton Duchy, Benedict Sackville's Narsen Duchy, Algie Kieran's Etman Duchy, and Neam Beja's Bisley Duchy. The total area of the 7 Grand Duchies added up wasn't much smaller than the Lancelot Empire. However, the 7 Grand Duchies were at war with each other all year round, seemingly showing no signs of stopping. Currently, Helen Duchy, Narsen Duchy, Etman Duchy, and Bonton Duchy were participating in this battle outside of Helen Duchy's borders. Grand Duke Benedict of Narsen Duchy was in the prime of his life and coveted Helen's beauty. In order to win the beauty's heart, he joined forces with Helen Duchy to help her resist the invasion of Etman Duchy and Bonton Duchy. Benedict coveted Helen's beauty and had the idea of obtaining all the beauty of the human nation. However, Helen had always adopted a lukewarm attitude towards Benedict Sackville's crazy pursuit. This made Benedict Sackville's heart itch, and he tried his best to curry favor with her. He often led Narsen Duchy's army to lead the charge at Helen's invitation. Helen of the Helen Duchy on the Bald Mountain was wearing a fiery red magic robe. There was a profound magic pattern on her bulging chest, and her long red hair fluttered in the wind. Complemented by the red fire phoenix beneath her, Helentina was as dazzling as a goddess of fire. On the hillside below her, Benedict of the Narsen Duchy stood in front of a luxurious carriage in an exquisite and clean suit. With a calm and confident smile on his face, he looked at the soldiers of Etman and the Bonton Duchy who were attacking the Bear Mountain. Han Shuo flew above the mountain and glanced at the battle that was in full swing. He thought of the location where Troda's wealth was hidden and was momentarily stunned. It was different from the valley where the mithril mine was produced last time. This bald mountain was made purely from a kind of sturdy limestone. For the Earth Elite Zombie, he could move unimpeded through the soft soil, but the entire bald mountain made of limestone wasn't something he could enter as he pleased. If the Metal Elite Zombie of the place of extreme metal could be refined, the Metal Elite Zombie that could pierce through mountains and split rocks would be able to easily charge in. Unfortunately, the whereabouts of the place of extreme metal had yet to be determined. Naturally, the Metal Elite Zombie had no way of obtaining it. Therefore, as he stared at the unending battle on the Bald Mountain, Han Shuo could only think of other methods. Standing high in the sky and looking down at the Bald Mountain, Han Shuo furrowed his brows as he pondered whether or not he should take the opportunity to sneak in. Troda's wealth was hidden under Helentina, and Benedict stood beside the carriage. The reason why Troda hadn't stored all of his wealth in his space ring was because he was afraid that someone would assassinate him and obtain his space ring. This Troda was also sufficiently dissolute. He kept 3 mistresses and 2 sons in the Helen Duchy. One of the mistresses he trusted the most had already been properly arranged by him. Once the news of his death was known by that mistress, the treasure at the bottom of this bald mountain would become the pillar of support for that mistress and his son's next life. Therefore, before the news reached that woman's ears, Han Shuo still needed to plunder the 400,000 gold coins worth of treasures as soon as possible. Just as Han Shuo was contemplating the method below, Grand Duke Helentina of Helen Duchy, who was being looked down at by Han Shuo, actually sensed Han Shuo's gaze. Grand Duke Helen furrowed her brows, and a magic staff embedded with a large piece of firespark stone suddenly appeared in her hand. This magic staff had an amplifying effect on fire magic. Helen raised it and pointed it at Han Shuo. Raging flames condensed into 5 human-sized fireballs that swept towards Han Shuo in the sky. Hateful woman! Han Shuo cursed in a low voice. He extended his left hand and nimbly moved his 5 fingers. Faint purple flames wove into a profound ice net, trapping all 5 enormous fireballs within. He used the mystical glacial spellfire's purple magic flames to form a magic net, wrapping the 5 fireballs and causing them to emit sizzling smoke. The extremely cold air instantly ground away all the fire magic elements in the 5 fireballs. Scattered sparks slowly floated down, forcing Helen to raise up a magic barrier. Who is it? Helentina looked up at the sky and only saw black under the sunlight. When she discovered that the fireballs had been easily dissolved, she immediately put away her contempt and asked cautiously. Snorting coldly, Han Shuo didn't pay attention to Helentina and flew towards the back of the bald mountain. He planned to temporarily leave this area and think of a way later. Behind the desolate mountain, Han Shuo had already seen some soldiers of Helen City. They seemed to be pushing some kind of enormous war equipment up the mountain. They were planning to ambush and kill some soldiers to change their clothes and join the ongoing battle. When Helentina saw that Han Shuo only snorted coldly and flew towards the back of the mountain without another word, she was alarmed. She shouted at Benedict below, "You guard this place well? There are magic cannons being pushed behind the mountain. A dangerous person has gone over there. I must immediately go and take a look." Without waiting for Benedict Sackville's response, Helentina patted the fiery phoenix beneath her. This super-rank magical beast fiery phoenix's gorgeous and bright feathers fluttered in the air like ribbons. Wearing a fiery red magic robe, Helentina flew towards the back of the mountain like a raging inferno. These magic cannons contained strange magic elements that were repelled by space rings. They couldn't be directly stored in space rings and could only be slowly pushed by manpower. Helentina had planned for this battle for a long time. Her trump card was to use this batch of magic cannons in the high terrain of the mountain to bombard the area below. After preparing for such a long time and finally tricking the two enemy duchies to this place with great difficulty, Helentina absolutely wouldn't let anyone ruin her plan. Therefore, when she saw Han Shuo fly towards the back of the mountain, she immediately spared no effort to stop him. Han Shuo had just flown to the back of the mountain when a fiery red shadow swiftly arrived before he could carry out his plan. 5 slender fire snakes, each 7 meters long and lifelike, wriggled their slender bodies in the air, splitting into 5 different directions as they coiled towards Han Shuo. The dance of the fire snakes spell could only be cast by a fire archmage. With the help of the Firespark stone-embedded staff in her hand and the mental strength amplification ring on Helentina's left hand, the dance of the fire snakes spell that an archmage could originally only release 3 fire snakes was now able to release 5 at the same time. The 5 fire snakes wriggled through the air, the scorching heat causing the air to crackle. The surging red flames were so fierce that it seemed as if they would immediately burn Han Shuo into charcoal if they approached him. Han Shuo was stunned. He had originally looked down on Helentina, thinking that she was an ambitious woman who only knew how to scheme and use her beauty to get ahead. He hadn't expected that she actually had real skills. Her astonishing strength and extraordinary beauty gave Han Shuo quite a shock. The snow-white bone spurs bloomed like flowers, and the hard white bones became soft. Under Han Shuo's nimble manipulation, they weaved into an enormous bone shield. Endless darkness covered the scorching sun, and the dark fog also covered the area just as the bone shield appeared in front of Helentina. The red glow of the 5 fire snakes wasn't enough to illuminate the dark fog that covered even the scorching sun. When the 5 fire snakes lost their target and coiled around the bone shield, roasting the hard bone shield until it was pitch black, Helentina suddenly couldn't feel a trace of Han Shuo's presence at all. The dark fog disappeared as quickly as it had come. A light breeze blew past, and the thick fog that had covered the sky just now surprisingly faded away. When the rays of the scorching sun once again shone on the small mountain, Han Shuo's figure had disappeared without a trace in the clear sky. All that was left was the pitch-black bone shield that had lost the support of its magical power. It scattered into dark bone fragments and fell to the ground. Taking out a white glove with silver threads embroidered on it, Helentina casually grabbed a piece of broken bone that had fallen to the ground. She glanced at the bone in her hand that was as black as ink, and her bright eyes scanned the surroundings vigilantly. She muttered to herself, "It's actually a damned necromancer. Where did this person come from?" After muttering to herself for a while, Helentina didn't have any clues. She naturally assumed that Han Shuo had taken advantage of the dark fog to escape. Turning her head back to look at the group of soldiers still busily pushing the magic cannons, Helentina shouted delicately, "Hurry up! Move all these magic cannons up the mountain." The shirtless soldiers who were immersed in their work all took the time to shout yes when they heard this. They secretly glanced at the goddess of their hearts, intoxicated. Their bodies seemed to be filled with an indescribable energy, and their strength suddenly increased by quite a bit. In a corner of a large boulder, a soldier who was holding onto the rack of the magic cannons revealed a trace of playfulness in his eyes. He was like a ferocious beast hibernating in the dark, looking at Helentina as if she were its prey. He laughed softly. Helentina, Bretel City's plundering has fattened you guys. It's time for you to shed some blood. Chapter 306. As soon as the female Grand Duke of Helen Duchy left, the previously dispersed dense fog once again slowly converged. The clear sky was covered in ink, turning it pitch black to the point where one couldn't even see their own fingers. The soldiers of Helen Duchy, who were doing their utmost to push the magic cannons, couldn't help but scream in fear. Within the inky darkness, an erratic shadow moved unrestrainedly. Unsuppressible mournful cries of alarm rang out wherever the shadow passed. These mournful cries of alarm would abruptly stop as soon as they started. The soldiers who had wandered back and forth between life and death many times quickly understood what it meant when these cries abruptly stopped. All sorts of unreconciled howls were isolated by the darkness. The thick black fog concealed the cruelty of the massacre. When the fog truly dissipated, there were over 40 corpses on the ground. Every corpse had been killed by a sharp weapon piercing through the nape of their necks. A total of 6 magic crystal cannons, 5 meters tall and 6 meters long, shone brightly after the fog dispersed. These magic crystal cannons were made from magical silver and all sorts of strange metals. Their barrels were engraved with profound and cryptic miniature magic arrays. The silver-gray magic crystal cannons were abnormally heavy and definitely couldn't be easily moved. Specks of black light flickered as if the light of the stars had appeared at the same time as the scorching sun. Heavy and stiff bodies appeared one after another beside the magic crystal cannons. 60 zombie warriors divided themselves into 6 groups and carefully guarded the 6 heavy magic crystal cannons as they pushed them down the bare mountain. It was indeed very difficult to push the simple and unadorned magic crystal cannons up the mountain. However, it naturally didn't take too much effort to push them down from halfway up the mountain. The 6 magic crystal cannons that had been pushed up the mountain with great difficulty by the Helen Empire's soldiers didn't even take a tenth of the time it took for the 60 zombie warriors to push them down to the foot of the mountain. Of course, these incomparably large and expensive magic crystal cannons weren't only guarded by a few dozen laborers. Only a few soldiers in charge of guarding the cannons were still shrouded in the dark fog and hadn't walked out. At the foot of the mountain, the 1,000 or so soldiers who had painstakingly delivered the magic crystal cannons from the Helen Duchy immediately realized that there was a problem when they saw the magic crystal cannons that had just been pushed up quickly slide down. The ones pushing the cannons weren't their own soldiers either. Before the 1,000-odd soldiers could react, the ground at the foot of the mountain suddenly split open. Along with a rumbling sound, a total of 6 extremely expensive magic crystal cannons rolled into the suddenly split open ravine one after another. The deep crevice was so long and deep that even after the 6 magic crystal cannons fell into it, they didn't make any muffled sounds. The 60 zombie warriors who had completed their mission disappeared into thin air one after another under the flabbergasted gazes of the soldiers in the back of the mountain. Only the deep marks left behind by the magic crystal cannons proved that they had indeed existed. Captain, what should we do? The junior captain looked at the senior captain eagerly. His brain was sluggish as he stared at the gully that was constantly healing, and he asked in a dry voice, "Inform the Duke. 6 magic crystal cannons are worth 600,000 gold coins. If we can't get them back, our lives will be over." The senior captain had a terrified expression on his face. He had originally planned to flee this place regardless of everything. However, when he thought of Grand Duke Helentina's ruthlessness, as well as his parents in Helen City, he stayed here like a boulder, already prepared to die. While the two of them were talking, the gully that had suddenly split open in the ground actually miraculously healed after devouring the 600,000 gold coins worth of magic crystal cannons. All of this was unimaginable before their eyes, and the shock it brought to them actually temporarily diluted some of the fear in their hearts. In the sky above the bald mountain, Helentina, who had returned empty-handed, once again returned to Grand Duke Benedict Sackville's side. The phoenix's feathers fluttered in the wind, causing Helentina's figure to appear even more beautiful and radiant. What happened? Nothing unexpected happened, right? Although Benedict was already middle-aged, his elegant and erudite noble temperament, in addition to the charm of a mature man, had a fatal attraction to ordinary women. Benedict, who had hunted countless women, looked at what was perhaps the most difficult prey to obtain in this lifetime and calmly inquired as usual. He's escaped. It's an evil necromancer. Helentina revealed a reserved smile. She wasn't stingy with her smile as she spoke in a slow and gentle tone. So it's just a cowardly necromancer. Hee, an insignificant character who doesn't affect the overall situation shouldn't have any effect on our plans. Benedict made this judgment with a peace of mind. He didn't express any further opinions on the matter and casually asked, "When can the magic crystal cannons arrive? I really want to quickly see those despicable invaders fall apart under the bombardment of the magic crystal cannons. They're already halfway up the mountain. They'll appear soon. I spent a large amount of money to purchase these 6 magic crystal cannons from the Brute Merchant Alliance. I've already tested their power a long time ago. You'll definitely see fresh blood blossom like fresh flowers." Helentina, who had tried to destroy a small forest with a single cannon shot, already had a picture of the enemy's flesh and blood splattering in her mind. Helentina, who had walked through blood and fire until now, was similarly filled with anticipation. Lord Duke, it's bad, it's bad." The junior captain at the bottom of the mountain ran over while stumbling, shouting loudly with a terrified expression. "What is it?" Helentina's brow furrowed. She was very displeased in her heart and shouted unkindly at the junior captain who had disturbed her mood. "All 6 magic crystal cannons are gone?" Although the junior captain was terrified, there was nothing he could do. He could only stammer out the truth with fear in his heart. What? Helentina, who had fallen from the peak into the abyss, felt a bit dizzy for a moment. She couldn't adapt to this sudden contrast at all and didn't realize that her shrill voice was contrary to her usual elegance. Some zombies pushed the 6 magic crystal cannons down the mountain, and then a ravine suddenly split open in the ground, swallowing all 6 magic crystal cannons. After the cannons disappeared, the ravine healed and the ground became flat again. That's the truth. The junior captain lowered his head and quickly described what had happened. He didn't dare to raise his head to look at Helentina's eyes. An enormous fireball shot out, and the raging flames immediately submerged the junior captain. Helentina's face was covered in a layer of frost amidst his mournful screams. She once again flew towards the back of the mountain on her fire phoenix, her anger soaring to the heavens. The fire phoenix danced gracefully in the air, and sparks shot out. Benedict was certain that the soldiers in charge of escorting the cannons were going to be in big trouble. "Lord Duke, what should we do? Do we still need to firmly guard this small mountain?" As soon as Helentina left the bald mountain, a military officer with a straight back and gloomy expression beside Benedict Sackville immediately asked in a deep voice. Benedict Sackville shook his head, and the elegant and calm expression on his face disappeared. With a calm face, he shouted, "Without the magic crystal cannons, this battle is purely a waste of military strength. We naturally can't do such a strenuous and unrewarding thing. Let's go. We'll immediately withdraw from this bald mountain. You only need to notify Kaba of Helen Duchy. I think he'll know what to do." Nodding his head, the military officer didn't waste any more words and directly left Benedict Sackville's side. He continuously issued orders to the high-ranking officers under him to retreat. Benedict Sackville was indeed pursuing Helentina. However, Benedict Sackville had the wonderful idea of swallowing up the entire Helen Duchy. In essence, Benedict Sackville was still a duke who only cared about profit. Chapter 307. Han Shuo had just finished collecting the 5 piles of materials from the mountain into his space ring when he suddenly discovered a large mass of pure and holy light illuminating the earth in the distance. The pure and holy light caused Han Shuo to instinctively loathe it. Wisps of light smoke rose from the light and dissipated between heaven and earth. After collecting all the valuable items on the mountain, Han Shuo raised his head and gazed into the distance. He discovered that the 3,000 zombies that had majestically marched towards Helen Duchy had turned into ashes after being bathed in the pure and holy light. Not a single one was left in the short span of a few minutes. Through the Een demon's line of sight, Han Shuo saw a group of 4 people gliding over on warhorses. 3 of them wore silver-gray armor with the cross of the Church of Light engraved on the chest of their armor. A white-robed light mage held a thick scripture in his hands. Every time he flipped a page of the scripture in his hands, a vast amount of holy energy would overflow. Helentina of Helen Duchy rode her fire phoenix and advanced side by side with the 4 of them. Her pretty face was filled with anger and a biting cold killing intent as they rapidly approached the mountain. Een demon that had come to spy on them was planning to get a closer look at them. The white-robed light mage holding the scripture seemed to have sensed it. His wise and bright eyes stared in the direction of the Een demon as he flipped another page of the scripture in his hands. A beam of white light suddenly shot out from the page of the scripture and struck the invisible Een demon in an instant. When the beam of white light hit the Een demon that Han Shuo had spent a lot of materials to refine was wrapped up by a strange energy and turned into ashes in an instant. Even the soul imprint that Han Shuo had planted in it no longer existed. A slender eye opened in the sky above Han Shuo. The white-robed light mage in the distance suddenly closed the scripture. His eyes seemed to pass through layers of obstacles and directly fell on Han Shuo's body. He said in a peaceful voice, "He's on the mountain." The 3 Templars raised their horses, which were also wearing silver armor. Their horses suddenly sped up and flew toward the bald mountain. The white-clothed light mage leisurely abandoned his horse and slowly floated up. He was even faster than the 3 Templars on their horses. Helentina, who had been flying at a low altitude on the Fire Phoenix, shouted when she heard this, and the Fire Phoenix immediately soared into the sky. A ball of fiery red light streaked across the sky, arriving above the bald mountain in a few breaths. The annihilation of Een demon not only aroused Han Shuo's anger, but also made Han Shuo realize how terrifying the strength of the people from the Church of Light was, especially the light mage with the scripture in his hand. He had destroyed Han Shuo's Een demon with just a wave of his hand. His entire person and the scripture were very mysterious, causing Han Shuo to be on guard. With Han Shuo's high speed and the Earth Elite zombies' invisibility, Han Shuo wasn't worried that he wouldn't be able to escape. Therefore, when he saw the eye of the sky appear above his head, Han Shuo didn't choose to retreat. At the very least, he wanted to meet the light mage who had destroyed his Een demon and see the situation before deciding if he needed to retreat. The magically condensed eye of the sky above his head required an unending supply of mental strength from its caster. When the light mage discovered that Han Shuo was standing motionless in his original spot, he immediately withdrew the eye of the sky, no longer providing it with a large amount of mental strength. Helentina, who was wearing a fiery red magic robe and riding a fire phoenix, landed in front of Han Shuo like a flame under the gorgeous sunlight. Helentina was about 27 or 28 years old, her gentle and beautiful face covered in frost. She coldly stared at Han Shuo from atop the fire phoenix and said, "Hand over the 6 magic crystal cannons immediately." With a calm and natural expression, Han Shuo raised his head to look at Helentina. He curled his lips and lightly laughed, saying, "This is only a little interest that your Helen Duchy has to pay. Remember, the 6 magic crystal cannons are only the beginning. I will make you spit out the things you've plundered all these years, bit by bit." "Who are you?" Helentina was first angry when she heard this, but then she seemed to recall something and began to interrogate Han Shuo about his identity and origins. "Hehe, you'll know soon enough." Han Shuo casually replied and didn't continue to look at her. He placed all his attention on the light mage who had already arrived. please come with us to the Church of Light. As long as you are able to recognize your sins, the God of Light will forgive your recklessness and ignorance." Red-robed Archbishop Koss looked at him calmly, as if he was the host inviting a guest. Koss and Ferguson were both Grand Magi. However, apart from light magic, Koss also cultivated wind magic. In addition, he held the Church of Light's divine artifact, Revelation. He could borrow divine power through the revelation in his hands. His strength was much higher than Light Grand Magus Ferguson's by a large margin. Koss, who was only 45 years old, was able to hold the position of a Red Archbishop. This showed that Koss was absolutely not an ordinary person. Above a Red Archbishop was the Light Pope, the emissary of God of Light in the human world. As the youngest Red Archbishop, Koss had a very high chance of becoming the next Light Pope. "I'm sorry, I don't have the time." Han Shuo bluntly refused as he looked at Koss indifferently. The three Templars finally arrived. The road on the bare mountain wasn't too rugged, so they hurried over with their horses. Standing on top of the mountain, Han Shuo gazed into the distance and discovered a group of a few dozen knights in silver armor slowly appearing in the distance. It seemed that Koss's group of 4 had abandoned those people and gone ahead of them. "My lord, there's nothing to say to this heathen. He brutally killed Lord Ferguson. Such a sin should be burned to death by the karmic fire." One of the Templars coldly glanced at Han Shuo and suggested to Koss. The Templars were a group of fanatics who completely dedicated their faith to the God of Light. The Templars themselves possessed extraordinary strength. Only when the God of Light recognized their existence and bestowed blessings upon them would they have the qualifications to become Templars. According to the firmness of these Templars' faith and their own efforts, each blessed Templar would receive a different divine blessing. The strength of the Temple Knights could be distinguished by the amount of godly blessing they received. The Temple Knights who only received a little bit of godly blessing would have the symbol of the Holy Grail on their chest armor. Those who received less godly blessing would have the symbol of an olive branch. Those who received more godly blessing would have the symbol of a cross on their chest armor. The Templars who received the blessing of the God of Light could display their strength to the greatest degree. These extremely rare Templars had the image of an angel statue on their chest armor. Every Templar with an angel statue had terrifying strength comparable to a sacred knight. If the Templar himself was a sacred knight, then his strength would be even more terrifying. However, these Templars were extremely rare within the Church of Light. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't easily leave the Temple of the God of Light. Therefore, the Templars with the image of a cross on their chest armor were already the most powerful Templars the Church of Light had to deal with outsiders. Now, the 3 Templars with the image of a cross on their chest armor were staring at Han Shuo with a kind of paranoid fanaticism. This kind of craziness that only stubborn religious people would have caused Han Shuo to become cautious. "Brian, please come with us to the Church of Light and explain clearly. I can guarantee that even if your sins are grave, the God of Light will still forgive your recklessness. At most, you will only be imprisoned in the Church of Light and won't be killed." Red Archbishop Koss was worried about the Lancelot Empire's warning and tactfully made a final effort. "Brian? So you're that unlucky new city lord of Bretel City. I finally understand what you meant just now. Humph. You dared to snatch my magic crystal cannon. You simply don't care about the lives of everyone in Bretel City." Helentina suddenly came to her senses. Her pretty eyes focused on Han Shuo as she coldly snorted. "You can try. If any duchy dares to encroach on Bretel City now, they will have to pay the appropriate price." Han Shuo remained unmoved and only shot a cold warning glance at Helentina. He then slowly pulled out the demon's lair edge and nodded at the Templar who had spoken first, saying, "Come, brave Templar, come and duel with me. As long as you win, I will consider your return to the Church of Light. I believe that the Church of Light won't swarm me at the same time, right?" A despicable necromancer doesn't need a second person to take action. The Templar pointed his silver spear at Han Shuo and said righteously. The silver spear shone with a dazzling silver light. This silver light belonged to the color of fighting aura, and Han Shuo was already familiar with it. However, Within this silver spear, other than the energy of the silver Do Chi, there was also a sacred and clean energy. When this strange energy fused with the Do Chi, it was much stronger than the pure silver Do Chi. The Templar had exchanged his stubborn and loyal faith for the blessing of the God of Light. Apart from the fighting aura that he had painstakingly cultivated, he also obtained a strange energy. This energy not only protected him from the corrosion of evil energy, but also gave him the power to purify the evil in the world. The damage that normal dark and necromancy magic could inflict on the Temple Knights was extremely limited. Even the high-level dark and necromancy magic with astonishing destructive power could still cause the Temple Knights to have very strong defensive abilities. However, the weapon in his hand was mixed with the power bestowed by the god. It had a terrifying destructive power against dark and necromancy mages. If ordinary undead creatures were to be touched by the silver spear, they would immediately be unable to withstand it and turn to ashes. Chapter 308. Watching the high-level Temple Knight of the Church of Light slowly approach on his warhorse, Han Shua's mind was tranquil, his expression callous. He held the Demon's Lair edge in his right hand and paid attention to the approaching Temple Knight. His space ring suddenly lit up and a tricolored skull staff appeared in his empty left hand. Han Shua was just about to chant an incantation to summon high-level undead creatures when he saw the divine weapon Revelation in Red Archbishop Kasa's hands suddenly burst out with a vast and dazzling holy light. This revelation quickly flipped through the pages even though there was no wind, giving its owner, Red Archbishop Kas, a fright. The tricolored skull staff was made of an unknown material. The tricolored skulls, yellow, blue, and purple, shone brightly. At the same time that the tricolored skulls shone brightly, a sinister power madly circulated. The light from the tricolored skulls converged and actually surged towards Kas, who was holding Revelation. The pages of Revelation in Kas's hands were flipping continuously. A beam of light floated out from each page he flipped. Those beams of light formed wondrous characters that flowed like a river in front of Kas. The wondrous characters clashed with the tricolored skull's radiance. For a moment, evil and divine energy simultaneously erupted. Between Han Shua and Kas, a violent aura violently radiated in all directions. The Temple Knight that had come to challenge Han Shua, as well as the other two Temple Knights, were all forced to continuously retreat by the terrifying power. Helentina, who was riding on the Fire Phoenix, had long since been unable to bear the burden. She flew high into the sky with the Fire Phoenix, watching the changes that were still happening below them in fear. Red Archbishop Kasa's previous calm and peaceful demeanor disappeared without a trace. Cold sweat dripped down his face as he stood there trembling slightly. His eyes were aghast as he looked at Han Shua in front of him. He felt all the energy in his body frantically pouring into Revelation. This was a situation that had never happened before. This revelation of the Church of Light was left behind by Kasa's teacher after his death. Kasa's fortune wasn't shallow. Under the baptism of the Temple of the God of Light, he had obtained the approval of the God of Light and obtained revelation. However, this divine weapon had only been in Kasa's hands for a mere 3 years. During these 3 years, Kas had been successful in every endeavor with his identity as a light and wind Grand Magus. Against some evil powers, Revelation had always been successful. He had never encountered a situation like this before. Holding the skeletal staff, Han Shua frantically poured all the mental strength in his body into the skeletal staff. The skeletal staff was like a large sponge immersed in water, rapidly absorbing Han Shua's mental strength. This mental strength poured into the skeletal staff and seemed to drive the magic of the staff itself, ultimately forming a bizarre tricolored evil light. All of it converged towards Kas, who was holding Revelation. Even though Han Shua had the mental strength of a Grand Magus, the frantic absorption of the skeletal staff still made him feel a little dizzy. However, Han Shua's willpower was stronger than an ordinary person's. In addition, his physical body was also ridiculously strong. so he didn't break out in cold sweat and shiver like Kas. Between Han Shuo and Kas, the divine and evil powers interweaved together. The terrifying impact made it so that there were no longer any obstacles between the two. Wherever this impact passed, the mountain rocks would shatter. The entire bald mountain seemed to be exploding violently. Loud rumbling sounds continuously rang out from between the two. This evil power is so enormous that I can guarantee that only the evil god's weapon of the Calamity Church can possess it. Kill this ignorant heathen. The Templar Knight from before felt dizzy from the explosion of power between Han Shuo and Kas. His silver-armored warhorse directly rolled down to the foot of the mountain. After standing up with great difficulty, the Templar Knight discovered that Kas was shivering all over. While he was shocked at Han Shuo's strength, he immediately proposed to take advantage of this opportunity to kill Han Shuo. These Templar Knights knew very well how powerful Red Archbishop Kas was. Kas, who held the divine weapon Revelation, had always been the nightmare of evil powers all these years. They didn't expect that today, in such a place, Kas would actually show signs of fatigue when facing this weak heathen. It was precisely because they feared Han Shuo's strength that they proposed to take advantage of this opportunity to kill him. The other two Templar Knights watched the scene in front of them from two sides on their warhorses. As soon as they heard the Templar Knight's suggestion, they immediately urged their warhorses to charge towards Han Shuo, who was struggling to hold on against Kas. The three Templar Knights carefully avoided the center of the unceasing explosions and took a detour from Han Shuo's sides and rear. Amidst the shooting of the divine light from Revelation, the three Templar Knights sang praises for the heroism of the God of Light. Their silver spears brimmed with divine power as they attacked Han Shuo. Among them, Helentina, who was hovering in the air as a fire phoenix, looked at the despicable actions of the Church of Light with a trace of disdain. However, Han Shuo was also her enemy, and the Church of Light wasn't something a mere duke like her could offend. She was happy to watch from the sidelines. Han Shuo, whose mental strength was madly pouring into the skeletal staff, coldly stared at Kas, who was also having a hard time. At the same time, he was constantly on guard against the approach of the three Templar Knights. Although Han Shuo couldn't move his body or use his mental strength, he could still use his demonic arts. Under the control of his mind, another strand of magical yuan flowed into the Demon's Lair edge in his right hand. Recently, the Demon's Lair edge had absorbed an enormous amount of energy from dead souls, faintly possessing the terrifying aura of a peerless weapon. After Han Shuo's magical yuan was poured into it, the Demon's Lair edge was like a bloodthirsty beast that had been trapped for tens of thousands of years, suddenly smelling the delicious taste of fresh blood. Accompanied by a shrill howl, it suddenly broke free from Han Shuo's hand. A mass of bloody light formed from countless stars crazily condensed into a bloody cloud. Boundless resentment and a tyrannical aura of slaughter caused the blood-red glow of the Demon's Lair edge to be as thick as a cloud. It actually covered more than half of the sky above the bald mountain. The thick stench of blood seemed to carry a soul attack. Not only the three Templar Knights who had come to ambush, but even Helentina, who had flown high into the sky when she saw that the situation wasn't looking good, was suddenly surrounded by boundless fear, resentment, and ruthlessness. Helentina, who was riding on the Fire Phoenix, felt dizzy. Her chest felt so heavy that she wanted to vomit immediately. Another crazy obsession gradually rose from the bottom of her heart. Helentina knew that something was wrong. She hastily chanted a spell to form a fiery red magic shield, completely enveloping herself and the Fire Phoenix. In addition, sparks appeared as the Phoenix's ribbon-like wings flapped, causing the interior of the magic shield to be filled with sparks. Only then did Helentina manage to suppress the urge to vomit. She urged the Fire Phoenix to fly further away from Han Shuo, angrily and somewhat fearfully looking at the battle between the Church of Light and Red Archbishop Kas, who possessed a divine weapon. The Demon's Lair edge's overflowing killing intent formed a negative soul attack. Its target wasn't Helentina in the sky at all. Therefore, Helentina, who had summoned a magic shield and had the Phoenix's sparks purifying her, was barely able to defend against the terrifying killing intent of the Demon's Lair edge. However, the three evil knights of the Church of Light didn't have it as easy as Helentina. The Demon's Lair edge hovered above Han Shua's head and danced wildly. The killing intent of this peerless weapon wasn't any weaker than the two divine weapons. With the Demon's Lair edge as the center, layers of thick blood-red clouds dyed the sky above the bald mountain a blood red. The three Templar Knights who had tried to take advantage of the opportunity to attack Han Shua were struck by the violent negative soul attack. The war horses beneath them fell to the ground with a loud thud as they neighed and bled. The Templar Knights staggered as they dismounted from their war horses. Blood flowed from their nostrils like two wriggling earthworms, directly sliding down their necks and into their chests. The three Templar Knights didn't know how to deal with this unfamiliar evil energy. This kind of evil energy was different from the gloomy mysteries of the Calamity Church. Instead, it was a kind of bloodthirsty, irascible madness, cruel and arrogant enough to destroy everything. The three Templar Knights felt heart-wrenching pain as they raised the silver spears in their hands and sang the praises loudly to obtain even more divine energy to protect their bodies. Their bodies sparkled with dazzling radiance as they continuously resisted the invading energy. After the Demon's Lair edge absorbed 90% of Han Shua's demonic yuan, it mobilized all the evil energy of the dead souls hidden within, forming an enormous evil magnetic field that possessed the ability to attack the soul. It started to corrode the souls of all living beings within its range. Red Archbishop Kos, who was holding Revelation, was already having a hard time resisting the invasion of the tricolored evil energy of the skeletal staff. When Han Shua's Demon's Lair edge displayed another terrifying energy that was completely unfamiliar to him, Kos almost couldn't help but groan. When the Demon's Lair edge circled above Han Shua's head and gradually turned into a beam of bloody light that shot towards Kos, Kos did his utmost to control his mental strength. He bit his tongue and chanted an incantation. When a flower of blood blossomed on one of the pages of Revelation, the frantically flipping pages of Revelation suddenly stopped and was quickly put away by Kos. The skeletal staff seemed to only be competing with the god of light, Revelation. When Revelation was quickly put away by Kos, the skeletal staff suddenly became dim and lifeless, immediately stopping absorbing Han Shua's mental strength. However, the Demon's Lair edge that had turned into a beam of bloody light persistently shot towards Kos. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.